This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mr. Tucker in for Michael Barr today. That's a good thing for all. Mr. Tucker maybe with a VP announcement this morning, but we're looking at healing markets. I take the day off.
I know.
And it's 10 a.m. I got the bat phone on. I'm looking at my Federated Money Market Fund. And I spilled my mimosa.
Yep.
What happened yesterday? I take one day off.
I mean, I come in here, the VIX blows out, and I'm saying, where is Tom Keene? We got the VIX at like 60. I don't know what happened yesterday with the VIX, but so we had a real sense of panic very early in the morning, Tom, in the newsroom here. A sense of panic. Boy, something's happening in these markets. That kind of subsided by midday, I would say.
Nice healing. SPX up 0.9% right now. Lisa will do that in a bit. I want to frame this out, folks, and I want to take it back to August of 2007 when LIBOR OIS, short-term money, showed how bankrupt America's financial system was. On a standard deviation basis, that was 4 standard deviations. I had the privilege of talking to a few Wall Street CFOs at the time about it. Yesterday's VIX move, not equatable, but yesterday's VIX move, Chevron, could you medicate Chevron with some Tang Zero over there?
Exactly.
8.6 standard deviations.
Yeah.
Here's the key phrase. I've never seen it.
Never seen it.
Never seen it.
No, and I'm just not sure what that all meant. We had a big move in the bond market yesterday morning. Things then subsided by about midday.
Right.
And Ira Jersey said, the bond market pays attention when the equity market moves 4 or 5%. But when the equity market moves is maybe a couple of percent like we saw at the close, no big deal. Yeah,
the bond market pretty stable. We got a lot of good guests. Very quickly here, thank you, YouTube viewers. July was extremely successful in our build-out of YouTube search. And subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts at YouTube to get handsome Paul Sweeney and the guy. I got an orange bow tie on because Lisa wore orange yesterday with Jess Benton, and I missed it. From our interactive broker studio with the Orange Report, Lisa Mateo.
And I got a little hint of orange, for today for our YouTube viewers. By the way, my apologies. Didn't get to do makeup today, so we're going for it. Here we go. Okay.
What's my excuse then?
I didn't have time for any of that. Looking like a turnaround Tuesday. We have stocks pointing to this higher open. We have NASDAQ futures up 1%, S&P futures up 0.9%, Dow futures up about 0.7%. I want to check in with tech stocks because they took this beating yesterday. We have Nvidia up 2%, Tesla up about 1%. Apple shares, though, still down about 0.5%. Over to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 3.99%. That's up 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.86%, and that's up 6 basis points. Markets also on the mend in Japan and Europe. We have the Stock 600 up about 0.1%. DAX in Germany, little change. We have the FTSE in London up about 0.1%. But the Nikkei right now up 10%. Yesterday that was down at the same time about 12%. Over to the Japanese yen. Yesterday was up. This morning down about 0.6%, 145.13 against the dollar. We go over to earnings. Machinery maker Caterpillar 7%, up 7%. Second quarter earnings beat expectation. That was thanks to stronger pricing. It really helped offset that drop in sales. Bayer sales beat estimates. Little change, though, shares in Germany. And shares of Palantir, they're up about 9%, boosted its profit forecast. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, blue button there, Detroit Lions colored blue button. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We're going to get started. We're going to go back to Kriti Gupta on minutes ago on the equity report with Nathan Hager with Nathan.
He's
Hager.
Pretty good, I understand.
Joining us now again from London. I talked to her interns, and they said, yeah, she can double barrel it. Kriti Gupta joins us right now. Kriti, you are encyclopedic on Bloomberg Markets and Bloomberg Intelligence, which is away from Bloomberg News. How did they report the Japanese yen struggle yesterday?
Well, they basically said that this is a carry trade unwind that's been in the making for not just a week after that BOJ hike that was historic, but for months in the making. And Tom, this has everything to do with I'm going to get real nerdy here, bear with me, but it has everything to do with positioning. People have been shorting the yen for so long that when you suddenly see the BOJ make this move, it freaks everyone out to the point that even JP Morgan is out and saying, look, we're only halfway through. There's plenty more to come.
We're hugely anticipating this. And there's this experiment by Japan over the years. But then, Critty, the backdrop of their failed experiment, if you want to call it that, is it's amid slowing GDP. Yet last week, folks, the single most important sentence said on Bloomberg Surveillance was Wei Li at BlackRock, who's modeling out 3% China growth. What do you see off the London desk, Critty?
Well, it's actually fascinating how Japan is such a roadmap for the United States, actually. And if you really, again, nerd out here, I mean, they've been this kind of guinea pig and almost experimental in terms of monetary policy. Things like QE started in Japan far before it started in the States. But I think what's really important here is the fact that they're dealing with wage inflation, commodity import inflation, an aging demographic, all of which, if you look at 20 years into the future of the states, that's exactly the same problems that you have.
Right.
So the fact that the BOJ is able to, or is just now hiking and starting to see this currency pain and fighting, by the way, a massive haven bid into that currency, it almost feels like looking into the crystal ball for the states.
Critty, thank you so much. Crystal, thank you so much. Critty Gupta, thank you so much in London. Great work out of Bloomberg Markets and Bloomberg Intelligence as well. Paul, what's it mean for American investors?
Well, I'm not sure, but we've got a professional here in our studio that can answer that question, Tom. Steve Chivarone, Senior Portfolio Manager at Federated Hermes. He joins us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Steve, what did you see yesterday? What was when you sat back at the close yesterday, what was your takeaway from what we saw yesterday?
You saw panic early in the day. We try to live by humility at the highs and confidence at the lows. Yesterday was a day for confidence, not anything else. I think a couple of things are going on. One, the trajectory of the jobs market isn't great. You've seen a pickup in the U3 that's been a little bit faster and accelerating, and I think that, with the unwind of the carry trade together, produced a little bit of a toxic mix. I think the market got ahead of itself a bit. But I don't think we're done with this episode yet. I think this volatility is here to stay. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more follow through in Europe on the bounce today. That's kind of faded a bit. And so my guess is we're going to be in a volatile period here for, at least the next couple of months.
A lot of folks, Steve, have said, for a healthy bull market or healthy market overall, you need to see every 12, 18 months a 5, 10, 15% pullback. We really haven't had that. And some people are questioning, was yesterday maybe the beginning of something? Maybe today suggests it's not. I'm not sure. How do we really think about it?
Well, I think it started about 3 weeks ago. Okay. We took our equity overweight down from 5% to 3%, roughly 3.5 weeks ago. We took it out of large cap growth and we took it out of IFA, thinking that those sectors were overdone. And as you got into this earnings season, our fear was that good enough wouldn't be good enough for big tech, and it really hasn't been.
Right.
And so whether it was that rotation, whether it was the kind of markets moving lower, that was the correction. I think what we still have to understand, though, is, are we really on the verge of something more worrisome in the jobs market? And I think that's an open question still. We still need to see how the data comes in.
You got a 3-year hold. And I'm looking here at a 1-year look back. The market strategist, Mike Allen at Axios, was out today. Good morning, all the people at Axios doing the market coverage today. Nice note. And Mike Allen stopped me cold. He said 12 months trailing, Dow up 10%, SPX up 16%, NASDAQ up 17%. We forget how far we've come. And yeah, I get the VIX, I get the yen and the other hemorrhages, but the basic line is we pulled back to some form of long-term support. Do I have that right?
Yeah, look, we had a 5,200 target for this year. We felt a lot of pressure, as I think a lot of folks did over the course of the summer, to raise that given how kind of hard the market was rallying. And ultimately, we decided not to because we thought there were potentials in the middle of the year for some volatility and a better buying opportunity. And so that buying opportunity is probably not here yet, Tom. I mean, I don't think we've necessarily seen the fullness of this volatility. But I can tell you that our conversations yesterday were not about selling. They were about where do we think about adding. Where do we think about jumping in?
Okay, so I don't know. Did you talk to Tim Cook yesterday? No?
I did not.
The people doing share buybacks, whether it's the Apple juggernaut or other people we don't even mention, what do people do when you crater like that and you have a published share buyback program?
Well, I mean, I think you try to get aggressive. I think there could still be, if you look at large cap growth, for example, Russell 1000 growth index, you were trading over 30 times. All we've done is go back to 26. Yep. That really should be kind of at a 20 level. So I don't think you're looking there for the values yet. But if you look at more cyclical parts of the economy, like a small cap value, which has given up almost all of its July rally, there you start to see opportunities on an index that's still 15% below its all-time high.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Steve Chiarone, Senior Portfolio Manager, Federated Hermes, a proud Trenton, New Jersey native.
There you go. Yeah. Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks,
really
Steve.
Appreciate it this morning with Federated. Futures up 47, Dow up 249. They got a 1% move up in the NASDAQ. We'll see where that goes. The VIX. We're all VIX. Where was it? Lisa, help me here. 50, 60 or whatever. Yesterday in the VIX, 100. It was over 60. Who's counting?
There you go.
We're down to, I can't believe I'm saying this, a quiescent.
I was calling out the VIX in your name yesterday
And
all
you
day.
weren't
A
here.
quiescent 31.27. With our news in New York, here's John Tucker.
All right, thanks, Tom. It's officially a race now. Vice President Harris clinching the Democratic nomination for president. Let's get the latest from Bloomberg's Steve Potusk in Washington.
The virtual roll call vote wrapped up last night, and the Democratic National Committee says the vice president won 99% of the delegates' votes. The process was a formality. No one else was on the ballot. Now the question is who will join Harris on the ticket. She's expected to announce her running mate today. Over the weekend, she met with at least 3 contenders, Mark Kelly of Arizona, Pennsylvania's Josh Shapiro, and Tim Walz from Minnesota. Harris is kicking off a 7 battleground state tour this afternoon in Shapiro's home state in Philadelphia. She'll formally accept the nomination later this month at the Democratic National Convention. In Washington, Steve Potusk, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, Debbie is now a killer, downgraded from hurricane to tropical storm. He had damaged homes and businesses, sent floodwaters rising, caused sweeping power outages across Florida and Georgia, and led to several fatalities. In Georgia, the mayor of Savannah issued a curfew.
It's going to catch a whole lot of people by surprise.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn is tracking the storm.
John, Tropical Storm Debbie is located on the coast of Georgia this morning, and this system is going to be responsible for some very heavy rainfall over the eastern Carolinas and Georgia over the next several days. Some places are going to receive in excess of 2 feet of rain from this system.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Several U.S. personnel injured in a suspected rocket attack at a military base in Iraq. What's been described as a recent uptick in strikes at American forces by Iranian-backed militias. The attack comes as tensions across the Middle East are spiking following the killings last week of a senior Hezbollah commander in Lebanon and Hamas's top political leader in Iran in suspected Israeli strikes. Global news, 24 hours a day. Whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
You know, Paul, I got to go back and I got to look at where the VIX was through all the, you remember 2008, and,
Yep.
all that. And did we ever get, we've been out here like 3 times before in history or something, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's just the yesterday it was just extraordinary. But we got back there. I'm looking back at the VIX here, back in March 31st, 2020.
Yeah,
53.38.
November 2008. I didn't know this. 80.86.
Yeah.
That's when it became a 201k.
Right. Yeah,
That's
that was
actually
tough.
the
That
day
was
we
tough.
started the triple leveraged all cash fund as well. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks recoup some of Monday's losses. Traders looking for bargains in the middle of a global market sell-off. A Goldman Sachs analysis of 4 decades of data, it shows buying the S&P 500 after a 5% drop is usually profitable. But Citi strategists, well, they recommend waiting before buying the dip. We head over to NASDAQ futures up 1%, Dow futures up 0.7%, S&P futures up 0.9%. The 2-year yield 3.99%, that's up 7 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.86%, and that's up 7 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,410 an ounce. Brent crude $76 a barrel. WTI crude $73 a barrel. On the economic calendar for today, a read on June trade balance that comes out at 8:30 Wall Street time. Tomorrow we have a report on consumer credit, and then Thursday on to initial jobless claims. To earnings we go. Uber up 5%, posted steady gains. That was thanks to strong demand for its rides, for its deliveries. And then you have Yum Brands down 0.3%. Weaker than expected sales in the second quarter. Consumers cutting back on fast food. Deeper than expected declines at KFC and Pizza Hut, but Taco Bell did see an increase thanks to its Cantina chicken menu. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Love the Bell. Huge fan of the Bell.
Are you
In
really?
Paris, it's called La Belle de Tac.
La Belle de Tac.
Yeah, that's what it's called. Hey, folks, let's talk the Olympics for 2 seconds. Our Summer Games updates. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Thank you, State Street Global Advisors, who figured out the Olympics would be a huge deal. Paul, I think it's a seismic shift where finally we're adding digital into the ratings, which gives you these ginormous numbers.
Absolutely. I mean, people are streaming these things on the Peacock. I mean, I was talking to
I'm
my
watching
youngest,
on YouTube.
Everywhere.
YouTube
it's everywhere.
Premium.
I mean, NBC has figured out just to get it out there. And
When does the Super Bowl go on Peacock, just as an example?
I think it could be very soon. Very soon.
Yeah.
You know, there'll be a digital option. there,
Congratulations to
streaming option.
NBC. Loving the coverage over there. Yesterday, he aged. Mandeep Singh joins us right now, Bloomberg Intelligence share buyback reporter.
Yeah.
What do you do with these I mean, we got like 8 things to talk about. Who cares about Google and a federal lawsuit? Mandeep, they're sitting there fat and happy. They get an X% decline. Do they literally pick up the phone and call somebody and say, buy 6 million shares back?
Well, I think in the case of Alphabet, clearly we saw this coming in terms of, which way the judge was leaning, and the verdict is going to be what it turned out in this case. Clearly, they feel they need to change the business model in terms of paying to Apple. And look, I don't think it changes anything for Google in the sense that the search engine is still the most wanted when it comes to the user preferences. So,
do they have an appeal?
Yeah, they will appeal, and I think they'll try to come up with remedies where people can change the options for search, the default for search, easier than they're used to now, and that could be one of the
All I know is anything but Bing. That's my search.
Matt Miller's a Bing guy.
Matt Miller's a big. Lisa,
Lisa,
tell me you're not on Bing.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, so I mean, we're like the rest of us. I mean, and Tom, the biggest issue is, I mean, the stock is absolutely unchanged on this news. That tells you, I guess, what we need to know here. But the reality is, Mandeep, this kind of reminds me of Microsoft 25 years ago. I mean, there's going to be remedies, there's going to be fixes, but at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. Is that what investors are telling you here about Google?
Yeah, there will be a behavior change in terms of how these partnerships are done. The traffic acquisition costs, it's a $25 billion line item for Google. Now imagine if they don't have to pay, but still their product is the best. Then that adds up to the gross margin. So actually there could be upside provided nothing else changes in terms of the DAC component.
Is Apple a monopoly?
I think, again, there is a pending DOJ lawsuit in terms of what they do at the App Store level, and clearly they would have to change their behavior as well. But
okay, I gotta forget about all this legal stuff. I don't care. Greg Store cares. I don't care. What I care about is yesterday's tantrum. We had a VIX out 8 standard deviations. What did Tech Animals do at a time like this?
I think this earnings season was kind of a reaffirmation of the AI trade, that all the companies suggested they are spending more on AI, and they truly believe in this super cycle. So I think market will make that distinction in terms of what are the true AI players that will benefit in the near term versus where the valuation is stretched and the money is nowhere in sight. And you're starting to see that. I think yesterday was one of the instances where the whole market sold off, but then you saw stocks bounce very quickly because there's
Is that Tim Cook buying back stock? I mean, if you liked, if you liked Apple 3 weeks ago, you really liked it yesterday at 12 noon.
You did, and that's where I think the top line growth really matters in terms of what these companies deliver over the next 12 months, because not every company will be able to deliver double-digit top line growth, and I would put Apple in that penalty box where there isn't a clear path to double-digit top line growth.
It seems to me the AI story has gone from I just want to buy AI. I don't care how I get it. I'm not sure whether it's the chips or the software or whatever. Now, I think investors are starting to ask the second question, the second derivative question is, what's the return on all this investment? How do you frame that question to your investor clients that you talk to? Where is the payoff? Where do you find it in the tech stack?
Microsoft. I mean, they are the ones who are quantifying that AI contribution, $5 billion run rate out of their $80 billion cloud business. Copilot revenue, $300 million for Copilot, GitHub Copilot. So instances like this where the company is framing the AI portion accurately and giving you a runway of how they expect things to evolve, I think those are the proof points that investors are looking for.
And we're seeing it on the advertising side. I mean, I think talk to us about how AI is used by a Google, an Amazon, a Meta in terms of, giving a better advertising product.
Yeah, I mean, Meta's print earnings this quarter was another proof point of how they are leveraging AI for, more targeted ads. And it's reflected in the ASPs.
So in your experience, Mandeep, what does a guy like Zuckerberg do? Did you see his new look? He dressed up for Emily Chang.
Oh, really?
He's got the curly hair
and
gold chains.
I saw his new yacht. That's what I'm paying attention.
He does quite a yacht, isn't it?
Wow.
What do the players do in technology when you crater like we did yesterday? Well, they'd buy more, right?
I think, again, they have the balance sheet to both do the CapEx as well as buy back their own stock. And every company, large tech company, seem to be more shareholder friendly right now, given, they want to be better at capital allocation.
Okay. So what were you doing yesterday with the VIX at, what was it, 60, 56?
60 something, yeah.
60?
In the morning.
Look, I think there was nothing in the fundamentals to justify that kind of move, and you just sit back and see how the market
You're just having your morning tea.
How about Nvidia? What's going on with their chip? They got a problem with their chips or something?
Now, that is a big risk. So this is not a recurring business like a Microsoft or, the ads business.
You got to keep coming up with new chips, right?
Yeah, and the moment market suspects there is some sort of delay, that's when you see a violent reaction. Oof. So the Nvidia move didn't surprise me, but that's a risk you have when you grow triple digits off such a large base. It's very hard to keep repeating that, especially when the product cadence gets disrupted.
Mandeep, thank you so much. Mandeep Singh with us. We stopped by on technology today after what we saw yesterday. Let's frame out where the tape is right now. The VIX from that, what did I say, 8 standard deviation level?
Up to 60
Never seen it before. Obviously, we had an 80 VIX in 2007 or 8. So, we've been here before, but we come in with a vengeance, an improving tape. The VIX from a 60 level into 31.22, 7 big figures in today. Somebody said, what's a stick? I was in a restaurant yesterday. What's a stick? I said, a stick's 1 VIX point. Move a stick.
A stick for us on Wall Street was, when you're talking about your bonus, was $1 million.
Yeah.
Got a couple of sticks.
Yeah, big sticks. And there's teensy-weensy sticks, particularly sticks after tuition payments. Anyways, 31.24 on the VIX and 7 big figures. Dow up 0.8%, NASDAQ up 0.7. Check that. S&P up 0.9. I'm off one day. I can't do a data check.
It's big moves
S&P up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 0.9% as well. Even small caps putting it on today after a beleaguered day. BitDog.
No, boy.
70 to 55, a 10 a.m. topic today with Paul Sweeney and Alex Hill. Stay with us with more market checks. The markets recover this morning. Later, El-Erian of Cambridge.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, after a global market sell-off, some calm starts to return to the financial markets. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up about 1%, S&P futures up 0.9%. We have Dow futures up 0.7%. The two-year yield, 3.98%. That's up 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.86%, and that's up 6 basis points. Some more Fed speak. San Francisco Fed boss Mary Daly said the labor market is softening. Indicated officials should begin cutting interest rates in the coming quarters. Few companies making news this morning. It's Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems. Executives from both companies are going to face the NTSB about that incident involving its 737 MAX 9. We have Boeing up about 1%, Spirit Aerosystems down about 1%. Alphabet, federal judge ruled Google illegally monopolized the search market through exclusive deals. Their shares right now up about 0.7%. And finally, Warner Brothers Discovery, their shares up 0.7%. The Financial Times reporting the company is looking to avoid that breakup of the company. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
We have to stop the show right now. I got about half of that. I was working here on Cam Kreis. We're going to have it on in a moment. What, Paul?
I mean, the question is, do they break up the entire company, which they just put together with the old Time Warner assets and the Discovery assets? But they're saying they may prefer smaller asset sales instead of a split. That's according to the Financial Times. So I'm going to go with that for the moment here. They don't know what's going on there, and they have a huge balance sheet, lots of debt. They need to do something.
Like their video game business. That's what it's
yes,
like one of those smaller things that they could maybe.
Yeah, okay, gee.
The calmest place on global Wall Street yesterday was the Elm Street Diner in Stamford.
Yep.
Because he's there 5 days a week. Joining us now, I'm screaming, "Get me Cameron Kreis." He hasn't been on in so long. We thought we'd drag him on. It is essay after essay on where these markets are for Bloomberg that is hugely valuable. If you have a Bloomberg terminal, it's exclusive to Bloomberg LP. Cameron Kreis is just definitive. Cameron, you're calling it Turnaround Tuesday. How's it going?
Yeah, I mean, pretty good if you're Japanese. Looking okay if you're American, and kind of if you're European. The whole Turnaround Tuesday thing is based on this idea that when the market drops on Thursday, Friday, and Monday, it has a tendency to rise on the following Tuesday. That works about 4 out of every 7 times. But when the market drops like 1% on each of those days, the annualized return on the following Tuesday is like 158% or something crazy.
Right.
So you can see why people kind of pile in, because the numbers say it works pretty well.
Cameron, I want to go macro with you on this, and we've got Mohamed El-Erian coming up, folks, and I'm going to spend the whole time with Mohamed on a failed Japanese experiment. This is about global slowdown. Whaley at BlackRock says 3% Chinese GDP. You know the Fed game. Cameron Kreis writes about it every day. But the bottom line, Cameron, is Japan has launched a reflation experiment that smart people said, maybe that won't work. Are we at the point now where the reflation experiment in Japan is toast?
I wouldn't say it's toast, but what I would say is that the Bank of Japan has a long and inglorious history of waiting and waiting and waiting, and only tightening rates when the rest of the world is about to top out and begin its, you remember like in the 70s, those swan divers from Acapulco that they used to show in Wild World of Sports?
Yeah, Lisa Mateo did that once.
I mean, I think they hiked in, was it 2000? Right before the dot-com bubble burst.
Yeah.
They did it again before the GFC, I think. And now kind of third time, maybe it's three strikes and you're out.
Then for a long-term investor, Cameron, let's go away from institutions like you're talking to at the Elm Street Diner in Stamford. Let's go to mom and pop. Can they use this as an opportunity to have greater long-term confidence in American markets, because this is a Japanese distraction?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably a little bit premature insofar as the U.S. market has arguably been the most egregiously overvalued, as sort of capital has been funneled into a relatively narrow cohort of names. the Magnificent Seven types. You know the people we're talking about here, which has led to some of these valuations being, kind of nosebleed levels. We've seen a very substantial drawdown in Nvidia as an example. But you look at Nvidia's expected PE ratios and whatever, and yes, with the proviso that their revenues are growing quite well, it still ain't cheap. And what we have on the way up was sort of this psychological. I mean, bubbles are not fundamental, right? They're not economic; they're psychological. And you had this psychological push to throw your money at what was working on the way up, and that virtuous circle can potentially turn into a vicious circle on the way down. And I mean, looking under the hood of the market, it certainly seems as if it's trading on a broader basis like the bubble is burst. In which case, you don't necessarily need to be a hero and be the first one to try to buy the dip, because insofar as this price action is quite actually reminiscent of what we saw in the year 2000, for those of us who have enough gray hair to remember that, you're going to get these nice tradable bounces. But if the underlying direction of travel is one of de-risking, which is what we've seen across the broader panoply or the broader universe of financial assets, then there's probably more weakness in store, and you can kind of be maybe a little patient.
Okay,
Cameron, what did you make of yesterday morning? I was sitting here with Matt Miller, 6 a.m. in the newsroom yesterday, and there was a sense of, boy, this is really unusual, almost a sense of panic we sensed in the marketplace. The VIX blowing out. What did you make of yesterday morning in the marketplace?
Well, it sure looked like, obviously you wake up and you see the Nikkei's down 12%, biggest since Black Monday of 87, you say, or 87, you say, holy smokes, that's something new. The way the VIX traded was certainly suggestive that there was someone who was trapped short a lot of exposure to the VIX, and it was sort of get me out, I don't care what price. If you've traded for long enough, you've had that sort of experience at some point or another. I certainly have. I think there's Bloomberg charts of certain assets that I won't disclose that have my name on it. The painful candle higher. And so that's what it looked like to me, is that someone was short, maybe VIX options or VIX futures or whatever, and just had to get out no matter what the price. Once that was sort of taken care of, things settled down a little bit. But even like fixed income, which had been working like a charm over the last week or so, sort of early in the morning yesterday, or sort of mid-morning yesterday, it just quit working. And that was before the ISM data came out. So you can't really say, bonds quit working because the ISM wasn't as bad as feared. Again, the fact that even ostensibly the safest of assets aren't performing is suggestive of a broader umbrella of risk reduction. And I think that's still the risk, is that we haven't seen everything wiped off. We haven't seen all the risky positions wiped off or reduced in line with what people would like.
Cam, we got to run. What are you writing about now that publishes today or tomorrow for Bloomberg LP?
Oh, well, I'm still trying to I'm still trying to figure it out. I think a lot of people took some sort of solace from the loan officer survey yesterday, which showed the degree of tightening lending standards moderating. That's great, wonderful. The correlation with future lending is okay, but it's certainly not rock solid. And if there is a financial accident, what the backward-looking loan officer survey says about future credit creation is probably going to be fairly irrelevant.
Cam, thanks so much. See you at the Elm Street Diner.
Pleasure.
Cameron Christ, Stamford, Connecticut there with Bloomberg, Bloomberg Professional Service. Just really, really great. Now, did you read Cameron Christ?
All the time.
It's like great. It's like,
he's a Duke guy.
Some days. Is he? I did not know that.
Yes, he is.
That explains a lot.
It does. Hey, Tom, yesterday we had the ISM services data. That came in positive. Around 10 o'clock yesterday.
Atlanta GDP now is not, is solid.
Yep.
Tucker would call that a solid economy. Let's try to have a solid newscast with our news from New York City. Always solid, John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Tom, in the presidential race, it is official. Kamala Harris, the Democrats' nominee for president, the vice president clinching the nomination last night. After a 5-day virtual roll call vote, the party says she won 99% of the delegates' votes. Nobody else was actually on the ballot. Harris will accept the nomination at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago later this month. But first, she has to announce a running mate, and that's expected to happen today. The story in this report from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
The Harris campaign says the two of them will start campaigning jointly today in Pennsylvania. Media reports say it's down to Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz, but it won't be officially over until either Harris or her campaign does the unveiling. In recent days, the frenzy of different factions wanting different things have pointed to internal fissures within the party at a time that it is trying to fully coalesce around Harris and her ticket. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Even though Debbie's been downgraded to tropical storm, forecasters warning the heavy rainfall and dangerous flash flood threat will not abate for at least several more days. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper declaring a state of emergency and residents in Raleigh prepping for the storm.
You got to go get toilet paper and milk and everything else because nobody has anything at home.
Well, the storm has led to several fatalities, but experts say the worst is yet to come as the storm system expected to stall over the southeast region. The system could pummel the southeast with widespread areas of up to 30 inches of rain. And primary day in several states, Washington state voters deciding between Congressman Dan Newhouse, the incumbent, one of the last remaining House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump, and two conservative rivals endorsed by the GOP presidential nominee. Michigan voters will decide which Republican and Democratic candidates will compete in November for the state's highly coveted U.S. Senate seat left open by longtime Democratic Senator Debbie Stevenow's retirement. Michigan's open Senate seat, one of a handful of races nationwide that will determine control of the upper chamber in November. And countries in Central Africa racing to contain a multinational outbreak of a mutated Mpox strain that's killed almost 500 people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo alone since January. Mpox caused by the monkeypox virus. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
I want to go back, John, to what you talked about, I think 30 minutes ago.
The sheds.
The sheds.
Yes.
They're going to take them away.
Well, a lot of the restaurants did not reapply to have them stay in place. So the city's like, yeah, let's just get rid of it.
I want to do a major shout out. Dan Doctoroff, who was hugely influential to me, whole number of jobs, including here at Bloomberg LP and, of course, as vice major. He wrote an essay 3 years ago in the New York Times and went through the whole history of this stupidity. I've always worried about, like where I live, a car plows into it. I mean, just basic stuff. And thank God that tragedy hasn't happened. But, like, they came for COVID. I get it.
I mean, I think the city did a great job, and the restaurants did a great job with these outdoor restaurants when we needed them most.
Yeah.
Now we don't need them anymore. We need the space on the streets, I would argue, and I think a lot of folks argue. So thank you very much, restaurants. Thank you very much,
I just
City of
don't
New York.
see them being used as much at
Lisa,
all.
what do you think, Dennis?
No, I think and
you're
then
the
the
only
ones
one with a life here.
The ones that are abandoned, like the empty ones that are beat down, they just look awful.
They look terrible.
No, so they served their time and served their purpose, and now it's time to move on.
I guess
But
if
thank
you're a
you.
cynic, you say all it's going to be is more parking spots.
Well, like we don't need more parking spots?
Yeah, exactly.
What are you talking about?
Major shout out, Dan Doctoroff, for an
Yes,
essay
Dan
3 years
Doctoroff.
ago saying, here's the history,
Can
here's
be.
what we did, 30 years ago, and let's do something about the sheds. For those of you nationwide, this is a big deal in New York. From New York City, futures up 38, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks on the mend after yesterday's sell-off. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, S&P futures up 0.6%. We have Dow futures up 0.5%. Tech stocks really took a hit. Nvidia leading the losses this morning, now up. We're learning also that CEO Jensen Huang, well, he unwound almost $500 million in his Nvidia stake since the stock hit its peak in that AI rally. Right now, we'll head to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 3.97%, up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.84%, and that's up 5 basis points. Global equities battling back as well. We have the stock 600, actually now down 0.2%. It was up about 0.1%. We have the Nikkei right now, yesterday at the same time, down 12%. Right now, up 10%. To earnings we go. Travel, Hyatt reported adjusted earnings per share second quarter beat estimates, but shares down nearly 2%. And then Celsius Holdings, that makes those energy drinks that the kids love, up about 5%. Second quarter revenue profit topped estimates. And then Planet Fitness, where a lot of people drink Celsius, those shares climbing up 11%, topped estimates, adjusted profit, and revenue. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I'm afraid to ask, what is Planet Fitness?
A gym.
See, Lisa,
It's a gym.
Lisa has
A gym
her gym
chain.
in
Yes,
her
it's
house.
cheap.
She's got the weights, the whole
In the
thing.
house.
Yeah, so she doesn't go anywhere.
Planet
No need for
Fitness
that.
is like
but
a,
it's
a
affordable.
workout place.
That's why people go there. Yeah, it's the affordable one.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm learning every day.
Yeah, sure.
Did you hear the Japanese math she just did, the Nikkei?
Down
I
12%
think
yesterday.
It's 12 take away 10.
Yeah, I
is
don't know.
2.
I don't know. I think,
Right?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
been a couple of days for our
Futures
friends.
up 37. Recovery in the market. The VIX 31.87. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analysts consolidate and analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard. For free, sign up for Portfolio Analyst. Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. That's a mouthful. Let me do that again. ibkr.com/free FREE
Nailed it.
PA. Nailed it. Joining us now, the most important woman on the planet with a conduit to the Harris campaign, Henrietta Trace joins us here on the VP pick. Henrietta, why is the senator from Arizona drifted away in the debate?
It's interesting. I think he is a made-for-TV candidate. You know, policeman, parents, astronaut, fighter, pilot. You really can't make a better candidate. But he has absolutely dropped up. I think a large part of that is driven by Democratic insiders overnight getting very bulled up on Walz. I even had a dream that he won last night and had to restart my phone this morning because I thought I missed a news cycle on my phone. I think the trend towards Shapiro and the import of Pennsylvania keeps that sort of very clearly front and center.
To the made-for-TV candidate, if all of this is about turnout, and in the middle, let me get this straight, what we used to call Good Morning Everybody with the heritage of the United States Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, Colorado, with affection in their public service. We called them Zoomies, which they hated. They'd put the stick in your mouth if you called them a Zoomie. You got to be kidding me here, Henrietta. You tag a Zoomie who can give her the Pentagon, the military, bonus round. He's 37 miles from the Mexican border, and they're giving it up because they're counting electoral votes in Pennsylvania or Minnesota?
Well, I mean, for my money, Arizona's electoral votes, coupled with her gains in Nevada, particularly in the back of really strong improvements with Latino vote, means that you can abandon Pennsylvania if you want to, focus on Georgia and North Carolina. You don't even need North Carolina, and you get more than 270 electoral college votes. Wow. So I think the trajectory for Arizona, I could be wrong. I'm certainly not in the flow right now on predicted markets in the last 24 hours. I'm outside consensus, but Mark Kelly fits every single box.
So, Henrietta, why is VP Harris taking this long? I'm not sure if it's this long, because I know it's an accelerated whole process here, but it seems like waiting to the last minute before she hits the campaign trail. Is there really that much debate about the pick?
You know, it's funny. I actually wrote 3 weeks ago when Biden dropped out of the race, and it was only like 15 days ago. I mean, what a year the last week has been.
Yes.
I think, quite frankly, this entire duration, if it could go on another 4 days, Democrats would be happy to have that happen. This is nothing but very qualified, high profile, and increasingly high profile Democratic white governors from very popular constituencies, 61% support in Pennsylvania for Shapiro, singing her praises. The longer they do this, the better for the Democratic Party. And I would just say that, the lack of leaks is really notable right now. The fact that we haven't heard anything from the Harris camp is remarkable. But this is around the time when Trump, during the RNC, announced that his VP pick was going to be J.D. Vance. So I think they're just drawing out this pomp and circumstance because it's fun. It's lighthearted, and that's sort of the vibe that Harris is going for right now.
What do you think the message will be when the VP does hit the trail today, tomorrow, and over the coming days here? What's going to be the central part of her message?
Look at the schedule she's got. It's all about turnout. She's going to every single swing state over the next 5 days. The only thing I heard that's waylaying that is the storm in Savannah. So they are going guns blazing. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that, but they're going, as hard as they possibly can through every single swing state with whoever her VP pick is, I think, to generate turnout, generate enthusiasm, and really paint Harris as a candidate versus Trump. And what's really interesting to me in the data sets right now is that Harris has successfully cast herself as the moderate in this race. Independents and moderates are flocking to her and away from Trump as they paint Trump as the extreme candidate and Harris representing the sort of new moderate ground. So that's something that they're eager to really grab onto, and that's what their swing through all the swing states in the next 5 days is going to include.
What do you expect former President Trump, what do you expect his strategy to be over the coming days and weeks?
Well, so far, he's only got one rally in Bozeman, Montana, which is a state that last I checked, he was ahead in 26 points in. So I'm not sure that that's really necessary. Yesterday, he spent time.
Dear snark, stop, Henrietta. That was maximum Henrietta snark. I mean, he's ahead by 26 points in Montana.
I mean, I don't know what you need to do there. It's not a big electoral college.
So seriously, why does he go there?
I think he's popular there. Yesterday, he spent time where he's popular with young white males on a kick.com stream with a really popular sort of far-right young male demographic where he's succeeding in. I think they're putting him where he is amongst folks that really like him, and that's what he's focused on right now.
Yep.
Debates. Where are we on debates?
Nice.
Great question. I don't see how you don't have a debate. I can't answer a logistics question, but I can't envision a scenario where Trump says, actually, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this. The logistics aren't panning out. I think Harris has said, I'll be there at the town hall on ABC September 10th. They're working on a September 4th date and some other dates. I think something has to give here. I believe there will be a debate, but I can't tell you how it's going to come to pass.
Maybe there'll be two. Henrietta Trace, thank you so much. Love the snark on Montana. And I've been reading Cook Political Report. Loving it.
Okay.
It's like Greg Giroux on steroids.
Oh, boy.
I was reading all about Washington State, more than you'd ever want to know. Selena Wang, now over at ABC. She grew up in like District 4.
Okay.
It's like out of a movie set. It's like wheat fields for 4,000 miles. But I learned a lot about Washington State. Maybe I'll read about Montana next. These markets, Paul, what do you observe?
I see, a little bit of a bounce back here, Tom. The S&P 500 coming back about 0.7%. The NASDAQ up about 0.9%. So that's good to see here. Yields moving a little bit higher here, Tom. You got the 10-year Treasury up about 6 basis points. Call it 3.84% on your 10-year.
It's disassociated from the credit cycle. I mean, everybody's saying it. That's not an original thought, folks. But this is about Japan, Fed economics, global slowdown. I don't hear anybody talking about the 10-year yield.
No. And I'm seeing, we talked about the Nikkei, off 12% yesterday. Up 10% today. So it's almost like it never happened. So some extreme volatility. Your VIX, Tom, coming in slightly down about 7 points here, 31.6 on your VIX.
Thank you on YouTube. We're like beyond humbled by the build out on YouTube. Subscribe there to Bloomberg Podcast. People come up and go, what can you do? And I said, here's what you could do. You can subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube, and you can listen to the remastered Help by the Beatles. That's what we need. We need help. Good morning.
Now these days are gone, I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind and open up the doors. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you being around. Help me get my feet back on the ground.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone, on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Great live chat going on today. Smart. Everybody on live chat lost money yesterday.
Yeah,
everybody
exactly.
as well. Paul Sweeney,
one.
Tom Keene, Michael Barr, John Tucker in for Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo here. Makeup free this morning, she said.
I know.
It's just so
Crazy
busy.
Tuesday.
It's crazy Tuesday here. Seriously, everybody's flat out. Our great booking team. We've got all sorts of great people. Double barrel. We're going to get to this quickly now. We've got Jane Foley with us, but first, Damian Sassower. Let's get to our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You know, and I just spent a whole 5 minutes putting makeup on. You didn't even notice.
I am so time out, Chair.
Time out for sure. All right, let's get to the markets because we're pointing to this higher open after this 3-day sell-off. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, S&P futures up 0.7%. We have Dow futures up 0.6%. Tech stocks really took a beating yesterday. Nvidia, though, now up 2%. Tesla up 1%. Over to the 2-year yield, 3.97%, up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.84%, and that's up 5 basis points. Markets also on the mend, Japan and Europe. Let's start with the Stock 600. Right now, it's little change. It was up about 0.1%. We have the Nikkei up 10%. We go over to currencies. The Japanese yen down 0.6% at 145.11 against the dollar. To earnings we go. Machinery maker Caterpillar up 3%. Second quarter earnings beat expectations, and that was thanks to stronger pricing. You have Uber shares up 5%. Heavy, steady gains. That was thanks to strong demand for rides and for deliveries as well. And then Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut owner Yum Brands. It's up 0.5%, and this was despite it posting weaker than expected sales in that second quarter. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. I asked Damian Sassower to drop by in his hugely busy day at Bloomberg Intelligence. Seriously. And I did so because of William Klein, who was definitive at Peterson Institute and wrote a paper years ago, hey, stupid, everything's interrelated. Everything's correlated. Damian Sassower, seriously, is a king of correlation, and he joins us this morning. So I look from the pandemic at yen, Indonesian, what's it, rupee? Rupiah? Rupiah.
Yep.
So I'm looking at JPY, IDR.
Yep.
It spikes out 3.5 standard deviation, and it's come in nicely. What do they think in Kuala Lumpur this morning of what they're doing in Tokyo?
Well, Tom, Kuala Lumpur's in Malaysia, not Indonesia.
Oh,
so
yeah.
let's get it right.
Nailed that.
Okay. So look, what we like to talk about here is, it's really about central bank balance sheets. And, when you look at the BOJ's balance sheet, it's only $4 trillion. So what you have to do is you have to consolidate not only the BOJ, but the government-run pension fund, GPIF, and the state-owned banks as well, like Japanese Post, to really understand what we're talking about in terms of size and magnitude. $20 trillion of debt there. All real rates were kept low by the BOJ's negative policy, but that allowed the government, Lisa knows this, to run public debt up to 200% of GDP and finance 33% of that with short-term borrowing. That is the carry trade, and we're not done with it yet. It's a big number. We're probably, if you listen to JP Morgan and some others who are out there who know better than I, 50% of the way through.
Do we unwind it with stability, or do we unwind it like yesterday?
I'll tell you, we talk about China exporting deflation to the rest of the world, Tom. In this case, Japan is exporting inflation to the rest of the world. So what does this mean as we unwind the carry trade? You've got central banks like Brazil who have the Selic rate again at 10.5%. Their overnight rate in Brazil is 10.5%. Well, guess what? They were cutting rates, not anymore. They're talking about hiking rates because they're feeling the inflationary pressure from this move in the Japanese yen. And you're going to see a lot of that reverberating through not just the emerging but the developed markets as well.
The yen was just at 160 a cup of coffee ago, Tom would say. Now we're at 145.
It's only an 11.4% move. It's only halfway done. If you look at 1998 and 2007, Paul, it took a 20% move in the end to really off the lows to real. And so if you believe that history repeats itself, you're looking for something similar.
I got time for one more question because Jane Foley's on deck here at Rabobank in London. Damien Sassar, and I don't want any inside skinny. This is an unfair question. Yeah. Do you suggest there will be margin calls? There will be trauma among institutional people in hedge funds?
I think what you have to realize, and look, let's be clear, net short positioning in the yen this time from non-commercials was the highest since 2007. That was the subprime crisis, but this time it's not banks, it's not foreign banks. You're right, it's hedge funds. Hedge funds are playing a much larger role this time around. So you're right, there's definitely a concern that margin calls and that is going to come through, but we're not really seeing that yet. Look to credit spreads. That's going to be, if credit spreads gap wider and break, that's when things get ugly.
Can you get a 9 o'clock tea time?
Not anymore, no. It's already booked up, but it's too late.
Okay. Damien Sassar, thank you so much. Writing for Bloomberg Intelligence. They're all part of the interdependencies amid this crisis here with the VIX 31.60, still very, very elevated. We're thrilled that Jane Foley would take time with us with Rabobank. Paul, why don't you bring in Ms. Foley today from London?
Jane Foley, head of FX strategy at Rabobank. Jane, thanks so much for joining us here. What did you make of kind of the market moves yesterday? What a morning that was across financial markets. What did you make of it in the currency business?
Well, certainly it was a move, but and I think many people in doing my job as a strategist role would say, you know what, this is overdone. The market was reacting as if we were in a crisis. Where's the crisis? We're moving into a cyclical downturn in the US, and yes, we can put the factors together and understand perhaps. This was a couple of things, coming together. Concerns about the US economy, they were building already with, particularly with the issues about tech, and then of course you had the carry trade being undone really by the Bank of Japan's far more hawkish position, the indications that they could be hiking again. So all of these things coming together, triggered its own, set of variables and brought us down the way it did. But there was no crisis. And, I don't believe that the Fed is going to come out, and I didn't believe that for a minute that they would come out and, and cut interest rates. If they did that, they would actually be saying, yes, there is a crisis and potentially give, very negative signaling. So that wasn't going to happen. And I think today, through the course of the week, and maybe up until Jackson Hole and maybe beyond, that the market is just going to reprice as it should be repricing for a cyclical downturn in the US for softer Fed policy, but not for a crisis. And I think we will get, we'll get volatility as those things come together, but I don't think we're going to get anything like the volatility that we had in the last couple of sessions.
And Jane, I think everybody left Thursday and we're all talking about soft landing. The Fed has done a great job. Boy, that narrative changed on Friday. How do you think this economy is going to play out here?
Well, if you look at the labor market, and it is really quite exceptional the way the market reacted and dare I say overreacted to that payrolls report on Friday. Yes, it was a bit softer than expected, but look at the unemployment rate. We've still got a 4% handle. That's pretty low in any sort of historical measure. In fact, just now I looked at the Bloomberg history for the US unemployment rate, and back until 1947, that's when the data goes back to on Bloomberg, the average unemployment rate in the US is 5.7%. So where we are now, it's pretty low. We don't have in the US a poor labor market. Yes, it's loosening, but it's still relatively tight from a historical basis. And I think we should pay attention to that. Yes, the Fed will be cutting interest rates in the coming months, probably in September. Do they need to cut 50? Well, maybe the data between now and then will suggest that they will, but I don't think we're even there yet. So I think what we were looking at was this huge overreaction because of all of these other factors coming together.
Part of it, Jane, and one final question, and we've got to run to the market and the news. Futures up 33 right now, folks. Jane, part of it is just a Hayekian clearing of the market. It's just all there comes down to it. Did we get that yesterday? And do we get that this morning? We're just clearing it out to stabilize and move forward?
I think in terms of dollar yen, a lot of the move, the carry trade has been cleared out. And not all of it. Some people have been in this trade for a long time. Some people, would still certainly be in the money. But I think a lot of it, so a lot of the unstable nature of that carry trade will have been knocked out. The fact that everyone and his dog was so short of the yen, that's no longer the case. So, the carry trade.
How did you know that vet bill was short the yen?
So I think we should be entering into a much more stable phase for dollar yen, given that the market, that given those positions have been cleared out.
Jane Foley, thank you so much. She's with Rabobank in London, a really original Netherlands house here. Really can't say enough about it. We protect the copyright of all of our guests. Get Jane Foley's published work through Rabobank in London. A nice lift to the market, up 0.8%. Futures now up 40. The VIX in 7 points, 31.62. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Tom, the deluge from Debbie has been destructive. The Category 1 hurricane downgraded back to tropical storm status, but it's the meandering movement as it travels northward that has made for some serious problems in the low-lying cities along the southeastern seaboard. And Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn tracking the storm.
Tropical storm Debbie now located about 50 miles southwest of Savannah, Georgia. It is moving off to the northeast at about 7 miles an hour. Top winds in Debbie now 45 miles an hour. Again, the big threat with Debbie is going to be flash flooding across eastern Georgia, parts of the Carolinas. Over the next several days, Debbie will be moving back out into the Atlantic later this morning and could regain some strength. But again, the big problem with the system is because it's stalled off the coast of the Carolinas and Georgia the next few days, very heavy rain will continue. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Hezbollah and Israeli forces exchanged fire today. Several projectiles penetrated Israeli airspace from Lebanon. Meantime, the U.S. and its allies working to head off a wider Mideast regional war following the killing of a top Hamas leader in Tehran. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons has more from Washington.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he's been speaking with leaders from Qatar and Egypt, the two countries who've been helping lead negotiations for a ceasefire.
It is a critical moment. We are engaged in intense diplomacy, pretty much round the clock, with a very simple message. All parties must refrain from escalation.
Iran has said it wants to avoid an all-out war, but needs to create deterrence against Israel. Israel says its forces are on a hair-trigger alert to carry out defensive and offensive missions. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Democratic delegates have selected Vice President Kamala Harris to be the party's presidential nominee. Harris officially claiming the nomination following a 5-day online voting process. And today, Harris is expected to name her running mate. The first stop on the campaign trail will be an event in Philadelphia later today. 7 months after an almost new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft lost a large fuselage panel during flight, safety investigators are conducting an extensive hearing to uncover any remaining mysteries. The National Transportation Safety Board will get an opportunity to grill executives from the plane maker and their supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, which builds the 737 MAX fuselages for 20 hours, stretched over today and tomorrow. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Lisa, Tom.
Hurricane season. And it's like, we're like into it now. It's not like June or July was early, but clearly all the reports, including from Rob Carolyn and type, is that normal? Are you sitting there, with a beverage in your hand in New Jersey going, where's the plywood?
Yeah, well, we're 6 blocks well inland. I think that's well inland. I mean, from the ocean. But
6
blocks? Yes.
No, that's not well inland.
It definitely is. There's no way this ocean's coming to me.
50 feet.
No, we're way back. But yeah, that's definitely an issue. And I think, Jersey, we got crushed during Superstorm Sandy. And as John knows better than anybody, the state built up the defenses pretty substantially. So we'll see.
With your tax dollars at work.
Exactly.
From New York City, recovering markets, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks recouping some of Monday's losses. Traders kind of looking for bargains in the middle of that global market sell-off. A Goldman Sachs analysis of 4 decades of data, well, it shows buying the S&P 500 after a 5% drop is usually profitable. But Citi strategists, they recommend waiting before buying that dip. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, S&P futures up 0.6%, Dow futures up 0.5%. The 2-year yield at 3.95%, up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.83%, up 4 basis points. On the economic calendar for today, a read on June trade balance. That comes out in about 15 minutes from now. Tomorrow, report on consumer credit. And then Thursday, we're on to initial jobless claims. Shares of Palantir, well, they're up about 10%. It boosted its profit forecast. Bayer sales, well, they beat estimates. Shares so little changed in Germany. And then after the bell, we're on to Rivian, Reddit, Airbnb, and Super Microcomputer. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Lindsey Piegza now, she has been really a lone wolf saying rate cuts really perhaps off the mark. And we'll get to that in a moment. On the Olympics, Paul Sweeney saying what a huge success that's been. Our Summer Games updates. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Thank you, State Street Global Advisors. The Olympics from Paris, our Summer Games updates. Dr. Piegza joins now from Stifel. Lindsey, I want to get this out of the way because I got other things to talk about this morning. You have said, slow down. We're not going to see 14 rate cuts. How do you respond to the modeled 28 rate cuts we're expecting to see by the end of the year?
Well, I think let's back up and just focus on September at this point. And a September rate cut is still a possibility and very much on the table. But if we put it in the context of what we saw in the statement suggests that the Fed remains data dependent and that policymakers are not yet convinced that the recent reports give enough confidence that inflation has moderated. So if we're just looking at the statement, that means that the Fed hasn't made a decision. It's still 50-50 at this point. And it's going to depend on the incoming inflation data.
What I see, Lindsey, is it's the third chart I looked at this morning. First one was Red Sox middle relief. Next one was on the yen. And the third chart I looked at, Dr. Piegza, was my brain freeze. I can't take a day off.
No, you can't.
It just goes.
The whole rhythm.
Lindsey, it was the whole Fed frenzy about an emergency rate cut. I got Atlanta GDP now above 2%. Do you model out GDP so weak that they've got to do an emergency rate cut?
No, I don't see that. I think this is a notion of, again, the market getting ahead of the Fed. When we look at the underlying economy, as you said, we've gained momentum from Q1 to Q2. The consumer has picked up momentum. The labor market, I concede, has lost some momentum, but it still remains, to use Powell's words, solid. Job gains are still solid. The unemployment rate is still low. And so there's nothing that suggests a level of urgency, let alone a need for the Fed to step in and provide support to the economy. Now, they certainly want to perpetuate ongoing positive conditions, which is why they are considering a near-term rate reduction. But again, if inflation does not come in as expected, it's going to be difficult for the Fed to justify that rate cut. That being said, I think the onus is on the data to convince policymakers not to move come September. So if we do see any further minimal progress, it's likely to offer enough justification to appease the market and cut rates in just about 6 weeks now.
I mean, the definition of solid, we didn't have time to talk about this because I was on a sabbatical. Paul, the Yankees took 3 games from the Phillies.
I know.
That's solid.
That's solid.
That's
solid baseball.
Yeah.
So, Lindsey, where all this volatility started really on Friday morning when we saw the change in non-farm payrolls came in, I guess, materially weaker, noticeably weaker than expected, and the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3%. Where's the level where the Fed really gets concerned? I mean, just taking a look at that unemployment rate, do you think there's a level where they say, oh boy, we really need to act? Are we there yet?
We're not there yet. If you look at where the Fed is putting the full employment range, we're still well below the lower bound. And yes, we have seen month-to-month volatility in terms of hiring, but the 3-month average actually rose last month to 170,000. And we're still seeing widespread job gains across a number of different categories. So it's really hard to identify this sense of urgency or this clear sense of weakness that the market seems to be honing in on.
Recession call, is that something that, I mean, we've been talking about it for a couple of years now, but is this a 2025 event that is more than likely to occur?
Well, I think the risk of recession is still very real. I would put it in double-digit territory, around 25 to 30% when we look out to 2025 and beyond. But my bigger concern is not that the U.S. economy falls into negative territory or an outright recession, but the notion that we allow the economy to slow, but the Fed continues to tolerate above target inflation, slow growth, elevated prices, the very definition of stagflation. That's the bigger concern for the economy, because at that point, the Fed's traditional monetary policy tools are rendered less effective in supporting the economy or taming inflation.
Lindsey, parse domestic final sales, our domestic economy, from the other noise. Off Atlanta GDP now, can you get to a domestic final sales that is recessionary?
No, certainly not. And in fact, when we strip out some of those more volatile components and we look at that core, that domestic final purchases, or excuse me, final domestic purchases, what we see is an even stronger growth rate, up near 3%. So again, when we're talking about an economy that has accelerated in terms of underlying momentum and gained even further traction when we strip out some of those volatile trade and inventory components, it's difficult to take a 10,000-foot view and say this is an economy that needs weaker policy. This is an economy that needs Fed support. And it simply does not come justified via the data.
Paul, when you look at the data, when you take one day off, sabbatical, can you see that the economy is being supported by lazy teenagers ordering breakfast from Seamless?
Exactly.
Have you seen that GDP element?
Exactly. That's not, that is definitely an issue. So, Lindsey, on Friday, if you looked across social media, a lot of folks were coming out saying, see, I told you so. This economy's slower. It's weaker than expected. This Fed's behind the curve. They need to start cutting rates now. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I think that's the same message the market has been sending for the past 2 years, and investors have been wrong. They've been preemptively calling for an end to rate hikes and then pricing in a series of rate reductions that have yet to come to fruition. And I think, again, going back to the statement, it fell short of the market's expectations for a commitment to a September reduction. The Fed's still honing in on inflation, which they said is still elevated, and they do not expect that it will be appropriate to reduce that range until they gain greater confidence. So that means they don't have confidence at this point. And I think the market is really missing that underlying message that it's going to depend on the incoming data. And keep in mind that with less than half the year left and those base effects from 2023 likely reducing in the second half of the year, the risk is to the upside, a lack of downward momentum to gain that confidence for the committee.
We got to run. We got to do a data check. Dr. Piegza, thank you so much and congratulations. The outlier brilliance. Lindsey Piegza with Jerome Powell saying, everybody calm down. We're waiting as well. She is with Stifel. Let's do a data check. Lisa brought in 6 ounces of gluten-free cereal.
Yeah, I know.
That's our first data
that's
item
no good.
this morning. I mean, you know, it's just
and there's Captain Crunch up there. I don't know why she doesn't avail herself of Captain Crunch.
I had full English yesterday. My breakfast off. Futures up 35, 0.7%. NASDAQ up 0.7%. Even small caps rebounded. Russell up 0.9%. VIX, Paul, where was it when you walked out the door yesterday? Like 50?
Oh yeah, it was crazy. I mean,
50.
We spiked up to 6. It was crazy yesterday.
31.82. A lower VIX number is a more quiescent market, less fear. 31.79, which is what we used to call a Lehman statistic for those back to 2008. We're nowhere near the kind of VIX that you need to see real quiet. Maybe we'll get there. It's not for us to say. Whatever. The Sweeney yield, 3.95%. What's the 30-year bank rate going to do?
We got the mortgages got to be coming down here, so people maybe get a little bit of a break there. And Tom, Bitcoin, we hit a 50,000. McGlone comes on yesterday morning, says 50,000 support. Sure enough, Bitcoin bounced off of
Look at that.
50,000. We're 55,300.
The BitDog Hour, 10 a.m. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. After a global market sell-off, some calm seems to be returning to the financial markets. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, S&P futures 0.6%, Dow futures up 0.5%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.94%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.83%, and that's up 4 basis points. We had some more Fed speak. You had San Francisco Fed boss Mary Daly said the labor market softening indicated officials should begin cutting interest rates in the coming quarters. Companies making news. That would be Boeing, Spirit AeroSystems. Executives with both companies, they're facing the NTSB about that incident involving its 737 MAX 9 jet. Boeing up about 1%, Spirit AeroSystems down about 1%. And Alphabet, the federal judge ruled Google illegally monopolized that search market through exclusive deals. Their shares are up about 0.3%. And finally, to entertainment, The Wizard of Oz could be coming to the Las Vegas Sphere. Yes, the New York Post reporting it's nearing a deal with Warner Brothers Discovery to adapt that movie to the entertainment arena. Sources say they plan to dish out $80 million to update the film to bring it to that sphere. That is your
That
Bloomberg
explains
Business
it.
Flash.
I got a call yesterday.
Uh-oh.
Kennel Fee has an audition.
Oh,
really?
Yeah, they
Flying
called
through the
up
sphere.
and they said, Does he have a SAG? Does she have her SAG card after the pandemic? And I said, yeah, the SAG card's still in effect. She's got an audition.
Nice.
For Toto.
Very good.
I could see it. Think of the
What about
payday.
Bettville?
Talk about scale.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of Hills beef dog food there. I want to point out here, there's something happening with the tape. The credit market's improved here a little bit. I don't want to make too much about it, but given the emotion, 10-year yield now up 4 basis points. Real yield moves finally. It's a healing tape this morning. Futures up 25. Our economic indicators through the week, through the month, through the year. The commitment of Commonwealth. Thank you, Commonwealth. Our economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to Commonwealth to learn how. He hasn't been up. The last time he was up was the last VP pick, Mr. Vance as well. Joe Matthew joins us now, host of Balance of Power, where they'll piece it together tonight. Joe, I want to go to the snark that's out there right now. Is the vice president picking her vice president, or is she being told what to do by others?
This is a great question. All I know is she hasn't reportedly made a decision yet, and I can't figure this out, Tom. It's very Trumpian when you think about it. This is more apprentice than what we saw on the Republican side. They're going to be on stage at Temple University at 5:30 tonight, and reportedly the calls have not gone out yet. Imagine hearing at lunch today that you have to be on stage, as part of a new ticket. So this is an interesting down-to-the-wire moment here, and I'm wondering, are people going to see this as indecision or deliberative as she tries to make the most important decision so far in the campaign? I thought I'd be joining you with a name, talking about the veracity of a pick, and we still don't know yet.
Wait. First of all, Paul, Washington wakes up at 8:30.
Oh, yeah.
So we're 3 minutes into the day. Let's start with that.
So Joe, what do you think is really going on behind the scenes here? Because again, this is for a presidential candidate, arguably one of the more important decisions for voters to kind of ponder.
Sure, 100%. It'll say a lot about Kamala Harris herself, which might be more important than what we learn about this running mate. I don't know. It's interesting here. Like I said, they're going to be launching a tour for the next 5 days to go across 7 cities, take this thing on the road. And there has been some discord among the progressive left when it comes to Josh Shapiro. And there's some thought about Tim Walz. The reports say it's down to 2 here. Tim Walz is a great guy, 6-term congressman, 2-term governor. He's funny. He came up with the whole weird thing, but he's not going to excite anybody. And so she's caught in a different kind of interesting spot here with this decision, knowing that she's going to be in a convention in just 2 weeks. By the way, there is real news today. She clinched the nomination late last night. If anyone's paying attention, I don't know how you feel about this being done virtually, but it was taken care of online. It'll just be a ceremonial reception in Chicago.
So what should we expect when she does hit the trail here in earnest with a VP pick? What do you think is going to be her central message here?
You know, based on what we've seen, it's the prosecutor versus the convicted felon. That's how they're going to try to frame this and somehow remove her from Joe Biden. That's why, by the way, this Tim Walz thing, getting an older white man, yes, you've got executive credentials, but isn't that what she just got away
Joe,
from?
let me interrupt here
old.
right now.
Yeah?
This is a Bloomberg headline. It's a useless headline, but we got Joe Matthew on, so I got to go there, folks. The vice president has decided on a running mate. That, according to the Associated Press, with an announcement coming in hours. Thank you, Brockton, for that. We've got the vice president, quote, has decided on a running mate. So there you go, Joe. You're 5 minutes into the Washington Morning. I think it makes sense. Yeah. One of the people out on YouTube live chat said, wait a minute. You're doing an event in Pennsylvania and the governor's supposed to grow up to shake hands. Doesn't that give Shapiro of Pennsylvania? Isn't he like, because it's in Pennsylvania? Or is that just window dressing?
We were told to not read into that by the campaign. But yes, that would make a lot of sense, especially with such late notice. And look, I'll remind people of, I think, one of the most important developments over the past couple of days in trying to understand the psychology behind this choice. Josh Shapiro has a long relationship with Barack Obama. And it's something that hasn't been known terribly.
Let me interrupt. That goes back to as the former president telling the present vice president what to do. That's the heart of the global snark this morning.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that between the eyes, but look, take a look. David Plouffe is in the House now. You've got half the place as Obama staffers. Yes, his fingerprints are all over this. He's also a huge reason why Joe Biden is not running anymore. You think George Clooney would have written that op-ed without Barack Obama?
God,
so
I just figured
here
it
we
out.
are now.
Matthew
with someone
looks like George Clooney. I never put the two together.
That's never been said before.
Never
jump in here.
Those words had never been uttered before. So, Joe,
never to be said again.
How about on the other side? How do you expect President Trump to react to what is some pretty darn good momentum from Vice President Harris and her campaign?
Well, he's been swinging wildly, which the campaign doesn't love. He's got a real message here. He's got a running mate. The campaign has got a lot of money all of a sudden, and he's questioning her racial identity and spending time on things that the campaign wishes that he wouldn't. He spent all day yesterday blaming the market downturn on Kamala Harris, talking about the Kamala crash and so forth. But I will say, I will reinforce, it's not just about the states that we dwell on so much. If you look in our own Bloomberg swing state poll, look at the issues. Who do you trust more when it comes to the stock market? Who do you trust more when it comes to interest rates, the cost of goods, the cost of services? She's underwater on all of those. So if Donald Trump is taking the advice of his campaign team, that's what he's talking about.
Joe, I guess I've got to bring it up because we've got to drag it forward. Paul's brought this up a couple times in the show. Do you have any wisdom with Kayleigh Lines on the debate schedule, where you're heading?
In terms of where it's going to take place or when?
Or when, or both?
Or if?
Great question. No, we don't, because there is a deal to have an ABC debate on September 10th, and I will note that the network says they will make good on it, and Kamala Harris could get an hour of an empty chair debate that night, which the campaign is drooling over right now. Imagine what it would cost to buy an hour on ABC
come on, Joe.
TV.
Yeah, dumb question. Why don't they just do two debates? They do one that she likes, ABC, the President Biden picked at it earlier, and then she goes over to Fox and does one with Trump.
What about Bloomberg?
Okay.
Good point.
I could see John Tucker's, John Tucker's a moderator?
That would be something to watch.
All the questions would be about the salt tax.
Salt tax,
congestion
pricing. Congestion
Joe
pricing.
Matthew, go get a nap. Thank you so much. Joe Matthew here, and very importantly, folks, seriously, the headline from the Bloomberg, the vice president has decided on a running mate, and a follow-up I have on that is with an announcement coming in hours. I'm not even going to do the guessing game because I don't think it's appropriate. I have no competency.
I don't think anybody in Washington has. I haven't heard anybody with confidence.
That interview with Joe was absolutely useless.
Yeah, he's right there.
I'm kidding. It's nuts.
It's nuts. But I mean, it's again, as Joe correctly pointed out, why has it taken so long? Is it just being thorough, fine, or is it just indecision? That could be a little bit of an issue, but we'll see. And,
can we have a little history here? Like, Spiro who from Maryland?
Right.
I remember the echo through an investment house how do you pronounce it? Kuali?
Right. Dan Quayle. That's right.
You know, I mean, I guess it's a big deal in the modern media. And
Sarah Palin
Twitter will light
for
up.
Senator
Sarah
McCain.
Palin,
For
thank
Senator
you.
McCain, yeah. I mean, another one. So,
I don't know. We'll have to see. We're just being calm out here after the market the last 24 hours.
Rich wants us to move for
Rich,
velocity.
I ruined a shirt yesterday. I spilled my mimosa when I looked at the bat phone at 10 a.m. I mean, I literally ruined a shirt. I took one day off, folks. Look what happened.
Look what happened.
With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, let's just recap. Vice President Kamala Harris deciding on a running mate, according to AP sources, with an announcement coming in hours. It is officially a race now. Vice President Harris clinching the Democratic nomination for president earlier. Let's get the very latest from Bloomberg's Steve Potusk in Washington.
The virtual roll call vote wrapped up last night, and the Democratic National Committee says the vice president won 99% of the delegates' votes. The process was a formality. No one else was on the ballot. Now the question is who will join Harris on the ticket. She's expected to announce her running mate today. Over the weekend, she met with at least 3 contenders, Mark Kelly of Arizona, Pennsylvania's Josh Shapiro, and Tim Walz from Minnesota. Harris is kicking off a 7 battleground state tour this afternoon in Shapiro's home state in Philadelphia. She'll formally accept the nomination later this month at the Democratic National Convention. In Washington, Steve Potusk, Bloomberg Radio.
Debbie is a killer, downgraded from hurricane to tropical storm. It damaged homes and businesses, sent floodwaters rising, caused sweeping power outages across Florida and Georgia, and then led to several fatalities. In Georgia, the mayor of Savannah issued a curfew.
It's going to catch a whole lot of people by surprise.
A Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carroll tracking the storm.
John, Tropical Storm Debbie is located on the coast of Georgia this morning, and this system is going to be responsible for some very heavy rainfall over the eastern Carolinas and Georgia over the next several days. Some places are going to receive in excess of 2 feet of rain from this system.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carroll. More than 40 athletes at the Paris Olympics have tested positive for COVID-19. This highlights a new global rise in cases. The World Health Organization says the virus behind the COVID-19 pandemic still circulating, and countries need to sharpen up their response systems. A British swimmer, Adam Peaty, tested positive a day after winning silver in the 100-meter breaststroke. Australian medal hopper Lanny Pallister pulled out of the women's 1,500-meter freestyle after falling ill. Several U.S. personnel were injured in a suspected rocket attack at a military base in Iraq. What has been a recent uptick in strikes at American forces by Iranian-backed militias. Meantime, Hezbollah and Israeli forces exchanged fire today. Several projectiles penetrated Israeli airspace from Lebanon. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Tom, Lisa.
Thanks so much. Futures coming off a little bit, up 40, up 35. We're now up 20, up 0.4% on Standard & Poor's future. But the bond market, given some recovery, low of the 10-year yield now 4 basis point move, 3.83%. 2-year getting back near 4%. Again, 3.92%. on the 2-year yield. And the 10-year real yield, I'm following that as a benchmark, 1.76%. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at WTI crude oil, Tom. We've had some pullback in crude. We've had this off another 50 cents here today, $72.40 here. Gold actually taking a little bit of a breather here, Tom, down off about $8 here, $2,436 for gold. And I will call out Bitcoin up 1.1%, $55,000 on the Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Surveillance were brought to you by IBK Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost. Global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. And we thank IBKR for their foundational support of what we do in economics, finance, investment, and vice presidential selection. Stay with us. A VP candidate soon. From New York, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks on the mend after yesterday's sell-off. NASDAQ futures, they were up as much as 1% in pre-market, now up about 0.4%. S&P futures up 0.3%, same for Dow futures. We have the 2-year yield at 3.91%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.83%, and that's up 3 basis points. Have to point out commodities real quick. Spot gold, lower, $2,394 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $72 a barrel. Some more economic data coming out. The U.S. trade deficit, it narrowed in June for the first time in 3 months. The gap in goods and services trade has shrank 2.5% from the prior month to $73.1 billion. What's moving the markets? Lumen Technologies up 46%. The company said artificial intelligence demand, it's driven about $5 billion of new business, and that it's in talks for a further $7 billion in potential sales. You have Zoom Info Technologies down 12%. Reported second quarter results missed expectations. It also cut its full year profit forecast. And then finally, EV startup Lucid down 9%. It'll get a cash infusion of as much as $1.5 billion from an affiliate of Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
We pause now for a meeting. What did we do before Zoom? I mean,
conference
we have
calls?
Zoom meetings now that are like 3 hours
went into the office.
long.
Thanks, Ari.
Are your kids Zooming?
They do all the time.
What is this?
Not as much as they used to.
Can you
'cause
make
they had
it
to
go
school.
away? That's all I ask.
It's here to stay.
It's here to stay. Lisa Mateo, thanks for that. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're staying on a Washington story. As Joe Matthew just mentioned, a pick of a vice presidential candidate for the Democrat Party by Ms. Harris. We'll see how that goes. We're paying careful attention to all the good media sources that will break that, including our Washington desk. But right now, we're going to digress here. We got a good tape. The VIX 32.67. Nobody cares because they're in munis. They're clipping coupons. They own a diversified portfolio, except, and here's the quote, investors have been aggressive in seeking paper, especially from high-tech states. Christopher Brigatti joins us right now, and he's had years of experience at this. I mean, he was at Morgan Stanley years ago. He's with SWBC. You're at Morgan Stanley years ago, and somebody's calling up and going, I've got a guy in Topeka with $100,000, and if we don't get him this bond now, I'm going to die. Is it still like that? Is the inventory questions for retail still germane? You can't get the stuff you want?
At times, yes, correct. And thanks again for having me. Yeah, it's a challenging environment sometimes to find exactly what you want. You do need a little bit of patience, but you can build the right portfolio.
How can the guy building a portfolio compete with Fidelity, you name the company? I don't get it.
It takes a little bit of wherewithal. It takes a good advisor being on the ball and having the right relationship with their internal trading desk, and or a good relationship with outside advisors. Now there's so much SMA money floating around.
What's that?
Separately managed accounts. There's been a huge influx of money into these separate managed accounts wherein investors pool their money together and they're buying the individual bonds with the help of a portfolio manager.
So a hitter like Sweeney here, how much money do you need to do an SMA?
You don't need a lot. You could do it with a couple $100,000, but to be really kind of get a good portfolio, I'd rather have somewhere north of $1 million.
Coming across the Bloomberg terminal right now, Tom, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz tapped as Harris running mate. That is according to CNN.
Chris, stay with us here as we look at this. Mr. Walz, this was mentioned earlier, 60 years old. He's the 41st governor of Minnesota, with all of the old Northwest, sure. Wisconsin, and all that will be his mandate as well. This guy is very different. He's somebody that did not come up off the East Coast schools or the West Coast schools, or that he was a social studies teacher. That alone puts him I don't care what your politics is. That puts him at the top. Can you imagine he gave a C out in Mankato to somebody? The parents came in screaming. Governor, he's been there for a good while, 2018. And it'll be interesting. I think this is a surprise for a lot of people. This is a guy that, came up with some struggle. His father dying of cancer when he was in high school. That changes your life, to say the least. And, he's out of the Ivy League school, Chadron State College, Governor Walz is different. Joining us now, Joe Matthew. What's the level of Matthew's surprise here when we see Tim Walz anointed?
Well, it's interesting. The tip sheets this morning were all pointing in this direction, and it didn't seem like necessarily it was backed up by a lot more than a gut check here. All the sources that I was talking to, Tom, were convinced in their own right that their guy was going to get it. I never heard consensus until the actual announcement, and I am blown away by the level of which this campaign kept this secret. Keeping the leaks to a complete minimum here is pretty remarkable before they're on stage together. But pretty interesting, you could argue she went with the safe bet here. This is going to make the Democratic Party happy. The establishment seems to like him. Progressives are not going to complain about him, and she's got somebody with some gravitas here who incidentally is a family man and has been married to the same woman since 1994.
What's important, it's important. Why are you casting aspersions at me, Joe Matthew? Joe, what's important to me here is this is not a fancy guy. There's a lot of fancy guys across American politics. Let me this is on the edge of Gomer Pyle. This guy was a command sergeant major. He was an enlisted guy. He was not an officer and a gentleman, right?
Army National Guard. Lived in a rural neighborhood until he moved to St. Paul as governor. He is a very different story. And by the way, he's not a bumpkin. He's the guy who's the only guy who has come up with a label that sticks in this campaign. And as silly as it sounds, it's that line about Donald Trump being weird. It has resonated. They were wearing T-shirts about weird at his rally yesterday. This is going to be something that continues through the campaign. They think he can speak to Americans in a different way than Kamala Harris can.
How do you think this ticket looks to the electorate, Joe? It's, again, Tim Walz, he's 60 years old, governor.
Yeah.
How does this ticket look, do you think?
Well, look, they're starting from scratch, and that's kind of an opportunity that they have here because they're going to be able to identify this on their own terms. The Oppo guys are out there, of course, as well. I don't know what we're going to learn about him in the next 24 hours from the Republican side here. But most people have never heard of Tim Walz before, despite the fact that he was in Washington for 6 terms and he's been a governor for 2. And look, you can look at that as an opportunity if we're talking about a fresh face. I just wonder, again, if we get back to where we were talking earlier, she just removed herself from an old white man, and she's decided to run.
Oh, come on. Hey, whoa. 60. Joe, stop it. 60 is not old. The only one who thinks.
The granddaddy on the campaign trail.
Oh, you're killing me here. 60? Paul, what do you think? 60 is
old? I don't know. It's just a new world here. I'm a little bit surprised, but we'll see how they do. But they're going to have a lot of events coming up in the next couple of days.
I'm going to give you this single sentence here, Joe Matthew, which I think really frames this out. This guy was the 7th most bipartisan person in Congress in one of the sessions. I mean, that's what we got here. Did she just pick Hubert Humphrey?
Oh, boy. Let's check back on that question. I mean, as long as we're being unfair here, you and I both are, apparently. How about we look at it the other way, though? She sees a legislative liaison. He can do what Joe Biden was doing when it comes to working with Capitol Hill.
Fascinating.
So, Joe, what's the schedule here for Vice President Harris over the next several days?
7 cities in 5 days. It's going to be quite a tour. And by the way, they're going to have a stalker. J.D. Vance is going to 4 of the cities that they are going to. And he'll be talking today at noon, as a matter of fact, in Philadelphia. As this is the real thing, guys. The sprint begins now. And everyone's going to be on the road, with the exception maybe of Trump. He'll keep doing his rallies from time to time. But it looks like they've got J.D. on the Oppo unit here following them across the country.
Okay, so let's get on the road. Obviously, Walz is going to go into Wisconsin next door. I assume there's some Green Bay Packers, Vikings affinity. Ha. Can he garner Pennsylvania attention versus what Governor Shapiro could do?
This is a great question. Shapiro had a relationship with people in Pennsylvania. You have to remember, before he was governor, things like the opioid settlement that resonated through rural towns in Pennsylvania. Tim Walz is going to try to have a story to tell like that. He'll probably pull the Scranton Joe kind of thing. I don't have an answer for you on that because they're tied in every credible poll, including ours, when it comes to Pennsylvania or within the margin here. And Tim Walz has to be road tested. This is why this week-long tour is going to be fascinating.
See, he starts using, Kaylee Line's jargon there. What in God's name is road tested, Joe Matthews? Seriously.
Listen, you know all about it. you guys have taken your show on the road. You have to get in the field. You have to get reps. You have to get in front of people, and that's something that they have not done together.
So
I just want to make a note here.
Yeah,
Chris Briganti's been really patient. Chris, we're going to get you back at another time. It's either you or the vice president race. Which would you pick?
I guess he has a little more clout than
We're going to get you back here, because people care a lot more about triple tax-free bonds and taking advantage of them than they do the VP pick. But Chris Briganti, we'll get you back here again. Really sorry for that. It is breaking national news. Paul Sweeney.
Joe Matthew, how about the other non-swing states? Do they just not exist here between now and the election?
No, in fact, you're going to see an opening of the map here, or at least that's what they want to be doing. It's not just the 3 blue wall Rust Belt states. They see a path in the Sun Belt that brings us back to a more Obama-style map if you consider Arizona, Nevada, some of the southern states like Georgia. If you connect the dots there's an opportunity to win without having to own Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and that's what's changed since Kamala Harris got the top of the ticket.
And now surveillance intrigue, folks. This would never come up on Balance of Power. Joe Matthew, do they promise cabinet positions to the losers in this derby so then they go out knowing they could be the next Gina Raimondo?
Are you suggesting there's deal making going on here in Washington?
It's appalling. I would never suggest that.
The only thing that's changed is they don't smoke anymore in these back rooms. They're just dark, smoke-free back rooms. But yeah, look, you've seen a number of people, including, by the way, Senator Mark Kelly, who's probably more valuable in the Senate than in a cabinet position, who would vie for a number of roles. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that tight now. I mean, Joe, I'm running out of time. There's never enough time with Joe Matthew.
No, there's always something going on.
He's at his morning Sanka. Do you know the Washington office is the only office that has Sanka?
Sanka.
It's amazing.
I've heard good things about it.
Joe, I'm trying to get the flavor crystals. They don't stock them.
This is really exciting. This is a very different guy, folks. Go read the Walz Wikipedia here and read all the Greg Giroux at work, what's going on in the Cook Political Report. But more than anything, watch and listen to Balance of Power, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons on this historic man. Can I just say, with this guy's public service and a life, can I just, editorialize and say, Tim Walz, you're no Dan Quayle?
Right.
I mean, or whatever. Yep. I think it was out there. It was a surprise. A gentleman from we love the Vikings. We should get Brian Belsky.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Figure it out. So that's where we are as well, folks. Future's up 22. We've got a vice president, but we have a full team.
Yeah.
We've got Trump. We got Vance.
Yep.
We got Harris. We got Walz.
Right, and they'll be hitting the campaign trail in earnest beginning today, will VP Harris and Mr. Walz. So we'll see how that duo plays out on stage.
We'll have to see on that. Futures up 23, Dow futures up 153. The 2-year yield 3.94%, 3.94%. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, John Tucker in for Michael Barr. Today. Lots going on, a market recovery, no other way to put it after the carnage. Yesterday, the VIX from a 60 into 35.10. That's still an ugly number, 32.57 right now. Futures up earlier off the Japanese rebound. What'd you say? down 12.
Down 12, up 10. So, I mean, boy.
Never have I seen that.
Yeah.
New standard deviation moves and all that, but futures up 19 right now. We've got a power-packed hour for you. El-Erian will join us. I want to talk to him about Japan and that failed experiment. We've got Cam Dawson on the markets. Really looking forward to that. Brent Schuette's going to join us here with the Northwestern Mutual in a moment. Professor Schiller, Walz of Minnesota, is selected by Vice President Harris to dash to November 5th. We'll do that here in a moment. Right now, from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. Yeah, and we got a bit of a turnaround after yesterday's sell-off. Stocks pointing to that higher open right now. NASDAQ futures up 0.4%, 80 points. Dow futures up 0.4% as well, 152 points. And S&P futures up 0.4% or 22 points. Tech stocks really took a beating yesterday. Want to point out Nvidia up 2% now. Tesla up 1%. Microsoft up nearly 1%. We have Amazon up 0.3%. Apple, though, still down more than 1%. The 2-year yield, 3.93%. That's up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 3.82%. That's up 3 basis points. You said it. Markets on the mend in Japan. The Nikkei now up 10%. We go to the Japanese yen, down 0.1% at 144.45 against the dollar. To earnings we go. Caterpillar up 3%. It's a 2024 profit. It's going to be higher than expected despite seeing slightly lower sales for the full year. Uber shares up now 8%, posted steady gains. That was thanks to strong demand for rides and also for those deliveries. And then you have Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut owner Yum Brands, shares down 0.3%, posted weaker than expected sales in that second quarter. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. We're going to get to Professor Schiller at Brown University in a moment, but first, on these markets, on asset allocation, on calm within the panic, the perfect guest, Brent Schuette with us with the Northwestern Mutual Company. Where is the opportunity, Brent Schuette, in the panic that we had yesterday?
Yeah, so I think the opportunity still lies within bonds, and you've certainly seen longer duration bonds perform well in this environment. Look, I think longer term, the opportunity is in cheaper asset classes, and that's small and mid-cap stocks. But right now, I'm a little bit concerned about where the economy is. I think we are still headed towards a recession, and I think there's still likely more shaking to go in the equity markets before we get to a point where we can start buying.
So, Brett, we heard I guess we saw a lot of folks on social media on Friday saying, hey, we told you so. This economy is weaker than expected, and the Fed is behind the curve. How do you think the Fed will respond here?
I don't think the Fed is going to do an emergency rate cut. I think those are largely predicated on people thinking the past 15 years is what the Fed is going to behave like in the future. Look, for the past 15 years, the Fed wanted to incite risk-taking. They wanted to bring back animal spirits. They wanted the market to move higher so the economy would push higher. Inflation was low. Interest rates were low. We're on the opposite side of that right now. And so anyone who thinks the Fed is going to cut because the market is falling is probably going to be disappointed. Right. Certainly, I think if the labor market continues to weaken, which we certainly are among those people that you mentioned on Friday, if the labor market continues to show signs of weakness, they will act, but not until then. And as I have mentioned before, typically the labor market is the last thing to go. When it goes, even if the Fed cuts, it's too late. And that's unfortunately where I think we're going to end up still.
Right now, folks, of course, we've got Brent Schuette with us in the breaking news of Tim Walz is selected as the vice presidential candidate of Ms. Harris here. He is the governor of Minnesota. That is according to the Associated Press and also according to CNN. Paul?
Hey, Brent, so what did you make of that labor number on Friday? The market certainly paid attention to it on Friday and then particularly yesterday. What was your take there?
Look, I think you can find signs of labor market weakening everywhere. The only thing that's really held up is non-farm payrolls, which have some oddities towards them. So the household employment number has not been strong. The unemployment rate is up 0.8 from its low, and we broke the SOM rule. Everyone in this cycle has been able to shrug off all the things that have preceded past recessions, like the leading economic indicators falling, the inverted yield curve, because they haven't led to a recession yet. And largely that was because they thought the labor market was strong. That, to me, is now showing signs of weakness, which I think is where people are reawakening to the reality that it's likely to still be a recession because of that labor market weakness.
A recession scenario with lowering rates, where does an equity investor go, Brent?
I still think there are parts of the market, and this is where I'm optimistic. There are parts of the market for people who think like we do, which is not in the next couple weeks or the next couple months, in small and mid-cap stocks, which trade as if they're already in a recession. And so I'll repeat it again. The S&P 600 trades at 8 times cash flow. Go back and look at periods of the past, and the only time it trades there are when we're in a recession. Right. The other areas that are a bit riskier are the areas that people think are more safe right now. Those big tech stocks that have been priced for perfection. This is where the concentrated positioning is, just like that, and the yen being short at the yen. And that's where I think there are still risks moving forward.
One final question. What's the economy of Wisconsin right now?
The economy of Wisconsin is doing just fine. And so, we've had the convention here. We've had our Northwestern Mutual annual meeting here. And so I think Wisconsin is doing just fine.
I know he doesn't want to get into politics. I'm trying to get Brent Schutte to go. The general counsel's got a speed dial to Brent Schutte at Northwestern Mutual. Brent, thank you for the wisdom there on Wisconsin and the wisdom of staying in the market. Futures up 21, the VIX 32.57. Joining us now in an honor, she's given us so much. Wendy Schiller's at Brown University. And to review again, she has a definitive textbook, basically Civics 101, which years and years ago was a required read, and now in the state of our political ignorance as a nation is a must read. Wendy Schiller joins us this morning. Wendy, Spiro T. Agnew, Dan Quayle. I can't remember the vice president FDR had, that Walz, I think it was, I'm guessing. Does it really matter who the VP is?
Well, Roosevelt also had Garner. I think it does matter in the sense of do no harm. I mean, I think that's the first principle of choosing a VP. Clearly, in my opinion, Kamala Harris chose the most, quote-unquote, neutral within the Democratic Party. In other words, nobody who had any baggage with key constituencies like the unions, like people who are very passionate about Israel, Gaza. I think that, and school choice, particularly the teachers' unions, in terms of vouchers, like Josh Shapiro. So she went with the person who will do no harm. Whether this is somebody who will attract more attention positively to the ticket, it's unclear. Most people haven't paid that much attention. Humphrey was a really good VP. Mondale was a really good VP. Minnesota has a pretty good, track record, but they both failed to win the presidency.
Well, thank you for that observation. Okay, let's go back to HHH and Mondale. There is a character to the progressive Democratic politics of Minnesota. Is Tim Walz a follow-on to the Germanic Democratic, what I'm going to call socialism of the 1930s, 40s, or is he removed from the heritage of Minnesota politics?
No, I think he exemplifies the heritage of Minnesota politics, particularly for Humphrey. People may not know that Humphrey actually worked hard to transform the Senate, which was dominated by very conservative Southern Democrats when he first arrived. And by the time he left, it was dominated by a more sort of northern liberal wing of the Democratic Party. So they have been transformative in a lot of ways, Minnesota politicians, because they come with a really diverse constituency. So they can speak to a lot of different people, which is probably why she chose him.
Do you see how her voice changes when she gets into the Schiller lecture mode?
Exactly. Yeah.
Paul, save me here, Paul.
I pay attention. Wendy, how do you think Vice President Harris will use Mr. Walz on the campaign trail between now and the election?
Good question.
It seems to me that she made a choice, even though she didn't pick Shapiro from Pennsylvania, to really worry about Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Minnesota's a neighbor to Wisconsin, and really using Walz in those states to mobilize particularly unions, but also independent voters, also rural constituents who may not be enamored with Donald Trump these days. Maybe he can go to North Carolina, which has a lot of those elements as well. But I think that's where she's probably going to center him. And she may herself try to spend more time, particularly in Nevada, where that Democratic base is powered by women of color, particularly union women of color, and Georgia, of course, where the black vote is just absolutely key to having any chance of winning it.
In the time we got left, Professor Schiller, I asked this of Joe Matthew. It's a snarky question because it's snarky out on Twitter, but I got to go there. Is Harris being told what to do by the royalty of the Democratic Party?
I have no idea, but they have leaked, whether it's strategic or not, that Obama, former President Barack Obama, has been on the phone with her, has been counseling her, and she did take, among others, David Plouffe, very high senior advisor to Obama.
What does Mr. Plouffe do for him? Does he get coffee for her? What's David Plouffe? He's been on the show many times. What does he do for the vice president?
It's swing state strategy. I mean, that's what he does, and that's what they focused on, not only in the general election, but also in the primaries against Hillary Clinton in 2008. I mean, this is their specialty, and that's what his job will be. Whether she listens to this advice is the big question I think a lot of people are asking, and we'll have to wait and see.
Wendy Schiller, thank you so much. With Brown University, the Taubman Center. 2 minutes to go here in the section here, 20 minutes to go to get the market open here. Paul, I'm going to call it quieter markets, but you lived the tape yesterday. How does this observe versus 24 hours ago?
Yeah, 24 hours ago, Tom, I was, Matt Miller and I were sitting in the newsroom at, 6 a.m., and we really sensed, boy, it feels like a little bit of panic really seeping into the market. You saw where Tokyo had been trading and where Europe was trading, and the futures here in the U.S. market. So yesterday there was definitely some real angst in the market, and that kind of abated a little bit throughout the day, and we ended down 2-3% is a typical sell-off. And Ira Jersey said the bond market, which had moved pretty dramatically, came back to be pretty much unchanged yesterday, and he said, the bond market cares when the stock market's off 4 or 5%. 2 or 3%, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah.
I don't have any pearl of wisdom here, folks. I mean, the triple leveraged all cash. I mean, yesterday it felt awful good.
Exactly. Sitting right there.
Somebody said you can do a share buyback program in the ETF, and I said, I don't think so. But, it's interesting to see. Dollar yen. Thank you to Jane Foley and others for helping out this morning. Yen was a 160. And it's had a ginormous move. That is the correct word, to 144. Stronger yen, weaker dollar. In this hour, in about, I think, 15 minutes, Mohamed El-Erian will be with us. And I really want to go back to something he provided leadership on a good, I'm going to say 10, if not 15 years ago, which is this failed experiment of Japan. That is the heart and soul of the matter here. And of course, I'd overlay on that global slowdown. As I mentioned a couple hours ago, without question, the single sentence of our coverage last week, that historic week for economics, finance, investment, and international relations, was Wei Li at BlackRock, who modeled out 3% GDP growth forward for China. That doesn't get it done for Asia. Quite frankly, that doesn't get it done for America as well. So we got lots to talk about here, along with a vice presidential pick reported by CNN and by the Associated Press as well. Futures up 21 from New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks recoup some of Monday's losses. Traders looking for bargains in the middle of the global market sell-off. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.4%. Same for S&P futures. Dow futures up about 0.2%. The two-year yield at 3.93%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.83%, and that's up 3 basis points. Have to point out Bitcoin, because it was down as much as 16% before the bell yesterday. I know you missed it, Tom. Bitcoin now up 0.8%, 54,852. We had those crypto-linked currencies like Coinbase Global. They were down about 15%. That is now up about 1%. All right, economic data. We had some more out today. The U.S. trade deficit, that narrowed in June for the first time in 3 months. Tomorrow, we get that report on consumer credit. And then Thursday, it's on to initial jobless claims. Shares of Palantir, they're up about 11%. It boosted its profit forecast. And Bayer sales, they beat estimates, but shares falling in Germany, down about 3%. Analysts are saying the underlying results were, quote, dull. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that, Lisa. Joining us now, Cam Dawson. And I guess it's not a normal interview because it's not a normal market, but very powerful in her research note this morning. And we're going to get into this Mohamed El-Erian in much more depth. I want to keep it on the markets here. But Cam Dawson from New Edge Wealth joins us. And Cam, you mentioned Tim Lee's book, The Rise of Carry. In your book, Carry Trades Unwinding, an important book to read, and you're 100% correct on that. Why should people worried about their 401k becoming a 201k care about the carry trade?
Well, we should care about the carry trade just like we should care about positioning overall. Positioning is one of those funny things where it's always max at the top and it's always at its minimum at the bottoms, which just means that there still is this herd mentality when it comes to people's allocations to stocks. And it's a really great reminder that when you start to see volatility, the masses will tend to sell into that volatility. And the end result is that you see the most underweight positioning at market lows. The challenge is going into today, what we're seeing is that allocations are still very high. They're only about a percentage point away from their 2018 and 2022 peaks, which just means we probably have some more volatility and shaking loose to do before we see an ultimate low.
Who was damaged yesterday? We had a number of conversations. It was the hedge funds. Who do you suggest will enjoy margin calls or margin trauma from yesterday?
It's hard to know. And this is what's so interesting in contrast to a time like 1998, where everybody knew it was LTCM or long-term capital management, which ended up perpetuating itself because the sharks started to circle when they sensed pain and everybody had their margin calls trying to control counterparty risk. Right now, we don't quite know. There's rumors and whispers about where stress is. We're certainly hearing it from our own trading desk that there was stress in different pockets of the street. So a lot of this will probably be revealed in the coming weeks as we get more information.
Cam, what did you see in the market yesterday? Was that panic from your perspective, or was that orderly selling?
There was senses of panic, but it's very important to note that panic didn't necessarily translate into full capitulation. So the panic measures that we saw were things like surges in volume into things like inverse ETFs, or things like the put-call ratio spiking. That's effectively people paying a lot more for downside protection than they want upside optionality. But if you look at those capitulation signals, or what you might call that full flush, that's where we really didn't see this market shake completely loose. You look at the measures of things like percentage of names at their 20-day lows, or things like the percentage of names under their 50-day moving average or above their 50-day moving average. Those aren't consistent with a big major low where people are selling indiscriminately. So those would suggest that there's probably more room to go, even though we did get that scent of panic yesterday.
We saw some of those names yesterday, like the Nvidias of the world, the big tech trades, which had been working so well for so long, really sell off there. Seeing a little bit of a rebound today here. What do you think about that concentration risk that we've been talking about for, I guess, so many months now about this market? Again, Magnificent Seven really taking up so much of the market cap of the market.
Well, and it brings us back to that carry trade, because one of the theses is that those concentrated names, those Magnificent Seven growth names, which had high returns and relatively low volatility, perfect for a carry trade, those were the areas where you saw the most concentration in the positioning. And so as that unwinds, it likely just takes time in order for positioning to recalibrate. It's also good to remember that valuations got extraordinarily stretched going into the peak in mid-July. And so when you have high valuations, you have stretched positioning, and lastly, stretched sentiment, everybody chasing price targets higher, that just creates an incredibly high bar to jump over and a lot of potential unwind.
Well, to cut to the chase, Cameron, and I'm looking at Apple Computer because Cameron Dawson's familiar with the chart, 236 and a vector down to 220. We enjoyed a 4.2 standard deviation move under 200 yesterday. I mean, forget about buy the dip. Does Cameron Dawson believe in reversion to the mean on a Tuesday morning?
Well, we definitely believe in reversion to the mean from a valuation standpoint. The thing about Apple over the last 3 months is that the stock surged higher, not because earnings estimates were moving higher, but simply just on PE multiples. So there might have been this this optimism about a refresh cycle. There might have been optimism about the new iPhone. However, it wasn't translating into higher earnings estimates, which put the stock on fragile ground and just sets you up for more potential reversion. I think there's an important point here, which is that was the case for most growth stocks going over the last 3 months. You saw parabolic moves higher on valuation and sentiment alone and not on earnings, hence the fragility and why we're seeing this pullback.
How about earnings? I think they still matter. We're right smack in the middle of earnings season. Exactly. What have you seen so far from this earnings cycle, Cam?
It still continues to strike us that pricing is the biggest topic through this earnings season, and companies talking about losing pricing power if they're consumer facing. That's not necessarily the case if it's business to business. You saw Caterpillar today actually talk about fairly good pricing. But if you're facing consumers, they are running out of steam to take on higher pricing, which suggests to us that there is margin pressure that could be on the horizon. However, that contrasts to 2025 earnings estimates that have over 100 basis points of margin expansion already built in. So our biggest risk and watch item that we're watching is that 2025 EPS do look too high for us. And we think that we're going to have an estimate revision down cycle. And maybe this market volatility is what sparks that to get started.
Cameron Dawson, thank you so much. New Edge this morning here as we look at the challenges of the market. The VIX from the 50-60 level yesterday, better, a 32.36. That's still hugely elevated off, I guess, the norm of 12, 13, 14 in our July record highs. Futures up 20. NASDAQ up 0.4%. Paul, you mentioned Bitcoin. I mean, what, 70,000 to 54,000? I thought it was a gold equivalent.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's certainly been speculative here, and we've seen it kind of move with markets and with rates as well.
A program note. This has been very successful. Thank you, State Street. Our summer games, our Olympic games, huge ratings there for NBC. Our summer games updates here on Bloomberg, brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Thank you, State Street, for your support. I want to get up front of our next conversation. Who I miss, there's so many people who have unfortunately left us. And I miss, particularly at a time like this, Paul Sweeney, Martin Feldstein of Harvard University, who was far more than our great fiscal expert, the founder, almost literally founder of Ec10, which Jason Furman's teaching now. But with Mohamed El-Erian here, we're going to talk about the oddity that is Japan, with the leadership, the intellectual leadership of Martin Feldstein from 15, 20, even 30 years ago. It's going to be a wonderful conversation with El-Erian of Cambridge as well. In the debt market, Paul, I think it's pretty quiescent. I mean, it's not the fireworks of the equity market.
No, look at the 10-year Treasury, 3.81%. It's up about 3 basis points here. The 2-year, 3.91%. So we were disinverted yesterday, Tom, for about a cup of coffee, as you would say. Now we're back to a slight inversion.
You think Mohamed El-Erian's ever had a cup of Senka?
Oh, I don't think so.
Certainly not. I don't think so. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Will we see that turnaround Tuesday when the markets open? So far, we've seen stocks point to this higher open after the 3-day sell-off. Traders kind of looking for bargains, so we want to see how things shape up. We also had more Fed speak as well. Words from San Francisco boss Mary Daly. Let's get to the numbers right now. S&P 500 up about 0.3%, 18 points, 5,204. We have the Dow. That's little change, up 27 points, 38,728. And finally, the NASDAQ up 0.4%, 66 points at 16,265. We have the 2-year yield at 3.92%. That's little change. A yield on the 10-year 3.81%, and that's up 2 basis points. Kind of giving that global look after the sell-off. We have the Nikkei up 10%. We have the Stock 600, though, over in Germany, down about 0.3%. Over to currencies, the Japanese yen, little change at 144.29 against the dollar. At the open, want to check in with tech stocks that took a hit yesterday. Nvidia now up 3%. Tesla up about 0.1%. Microsoft up 1%. Amazon 0.5%, but Apple down 1%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Joining us now, Mohamed El-Erian, where we're supposed to talk about Fed policy, this, that. Well, throw it out the window. Mohamed El-Erian is definitive in game theory and thinking about the probabilities, the risk, the uncertainty of given events, including what we saw yesterday. He is advantaged by being at Queen's College, the University of Cambridge, which means he's advantaged by one of the world's great Asian programs with the leadership of Andrew Marsham, who's just absolutely definitive on these studies. Dr. El-Erian, I want to go back to Martin Feldstein just a year and a half before he died. The Japanese economy is a paradoxical mixture of prosperity and failure. Marty Feldstein was so far out front on their cyclic failure to be normal. When Japan blew up yesterday with their new policy, when they blew up yesterday, the equity market decline, how does that redound over to the American and the Western markets?
Tom, thanks for having me. And I thought we were going to go straight to the miracle of the Mets still being in the wild card chase.
That is a miracle. It was discussed this morning.
It is a miracle. Look, when you run an economy at low growth, high debt, zero interest rates, and quantitative easing for a number of decades, and that's what happened to Japan, then you get first the contrast that Marty Feldstein correctly pointed out, which is the flow numbers are awful, but the stock numbers are great. So a wealthy economy that nevertheless doesn't grow. But importantly, you encourage that wealth to go seek higher returns elsewhere. And that's what happened. The Japanese financial system became very large holders of other people's securities. Then when you change the regime and you raise interest rates, the currency appreciates, inflation comes back, suddenly people cannot refinance these positions, and there are either actual or perceived sales. So what happened in the last few days is a shock that started in the US, migrated to Japan. It then exposed a vulnerability that a lot of people knew about, but didn't take as seriously. And then that got amplified, and then it came back here Monday.
The thing to me that's so important here, Mohamed, and this goes back to your arch excellence in game theory, is a T decision. Japan has to make a T decision, except it's not like 10 years ago. Whaley at BlackRock says China, if they're lucky, will do 3% real GDP growth. No one's prepared for that, I understand. How does Japan adjust given the new struggling China?
So they have a financial issue and an economic issue. The financial issue will be easier. Forbearance, regulatory forbearance. So they will not force sales from their financial institutions. They will have a lot more patience with the mismatches that the financial institutions have. In terms of the real economy, they face the same issue that most countries face, which is, with the exception of the US, and even the US has a question mark over it, there isn't much growth in the global economy.
Yeah.
So they will be competing for a limited pie. And China is way ahead of other countries trying to get a bigger share of that pie.
I can't emphasize enough, Paul. Bruce Kassman at JP Morgan was brilliant on this. In a global tepidness, disinflation is the overlay that affects us.
Mohamed, when I started on Wall Street in the mid-'80s, a tour of duty in Tokyo was an absolute must. That's how important Japan was to global Wall Street. But then for the last 25 years or so, we just never talked about it. What changed in the last year or two that people like Warren Buffett are saying you really have to pay attention to Japan? What's changed?
So I think what's changed is the hypothesis that they are finally exiting multi-decades of economic mediocrity. That is, I think, what has changed. And that's why up to July, the Japanese stock market was the deer. I mean, people fell in love with the Japanese stock market in a way that they haven't done for a very long time. That is what has changed. But again, it's important, exactly what you said. most people stopped looking at Japan. So the understanding of Japan is not as deep as you'd like it to be in Wall Street.
All right, Mohamed, I'd love to get your thoughts while we have you. What did you experience yesterday? What did you see yesterday in the U.S. markets? Because, boy, yesterday morning, it was because Tom Keene was not in. The market didn't know what to do.
I took off yesterday, Mohamed. I was so stunned by the New York Mets that I needed a day of rest.
What did you make of yesterday's market action, Mohamed?
So yesterday was an example where we lost three anchors. We lost the notion of U.S. economic exceptionalism. That anchor was put in doubt with the data. We lost the notion of policy anchors because people started calling on the Fed to do an intermeeting cut. There was a lot of ridiculous things being said, and we lost Tom Keene's calm voice. So, it's incredible to see the 2-year move 20 basis points intraday. It's incredible. I got a sense, and I put this on X, that we overshot on the fixed income side. So I was quite comfortable about Treasury yields coming back. I was worried about whether credit would be contaminated. Credit was not contaminated in any meaningful sense yesterday. That was a pleasant surprise. And then I was reassured that we didn't have a market functioning problem.
With us, Mohamed El-Erian of Allianz, and of course, Queen's College, the University of Cambridge. We'll continue with Dr. El-Erian. We got green on the screen, not like we had on futures, but we'll take it. SPX up 0.4%, the VIX 32.48. That's elevated off what we know for years. Mohamed El-Erian, I want to go back to your game theory and the T decision. I take immense issue with the phrase emergency rate cut. There's no sense of history of what central banks should use. What is the T decision that Jerome Powell faces after yesterday's festivities?
The marketplace thinks it is whether to cut 25, 50, or 75 in September. That is what the marketplace thinks. I would bring you to the end of this month and Jackson Hole. He has a golden opportunity to regain control of the policy narrative. And to do that, he has to take some risk in laying out what he thinks the neutral interest rate is, in discussing, like the Bank of England has discussed, what structural changes are happening to the domestic economy and to the global economy. So for me, his T decision is actually at Jackson Hole, whether he just gives a mail-in speech or whether he tries to regain control of the policy narrative.
Well, and Mohamed, we're going to get the surveillance Gulf Stream out to get you to Jackson Hole for our coverage. Lisa Bramwitz and I will be at Jackson Hole. Wonderful. With that said, Mohamed, the heart of the matter is you mentioned BOE and particularly Lagarde's ECB, and she gave a speech last year at she wrote a paper last year at Jackson Hole on this. Mohamed, we're addicted. We're in a Greenspanian measured cadence. Does that fit the events right now? Or does Powell have to elucidate at Jackson Hole that we can lose measured and be more ad hoc, more unmeasured in our policy?
So it's really interesting because I think the Fed, being so excessively data dependent, has been actually quite ad hoc. The amount of pivots in the forward guidance we've had over the last 12 months is enormous. I actually have a slide that shows every pivot. And that's a problem because if you allow data to swing you so much, then you become an amplifier of market volatility rather than a stabilizer. So I think they need to be less ad hoc, less so data dependent, and have the courage to be strategic, have a courage to say, this is where we think the economy is going. I understand why they're not doing that. They tried it in 2021 with the famous transitory inflation call. They made a horrible mistake. And because of that, they've shied away. But that's what a central bank is supposed to do. That is what Greenspan did. That is what Bernanke did. That is what Yellen did. And I think it's important for this Fed to be not just data dependent, but also to have a forward-looking view of the economy.
That's a great point, Mohamed, because a lot of folks that we speak to, both in academia and in practice, say they're not looking at the right data. They're not looking at the real-time data. If they were looking at the real-time data, they would realize that the economy is in fact slowing, that inflation is in fact under control, and that they should be cutting rates right now. Do you go that far?
Yeah, that's where I was. I called for a cut last week.
Yep.
I've been arguing for the last 3 months that the U.S. economy is slowing much faster than most people anticipate. Why? Because in addition to the data, I've been listening to the companies. I've been listening to what they're telling us about what they're seeing in terms of demand. They should have cut in July. They didn't. That was a mistake. They can still regain control of the narrative, but it is doing some really hard work that they need to do and having the courage to share it with the rest of us.
Mohamed, we got time for one final question, and I got 8 places to go here, but I'm going to do an audible on you, Mohamed, and we've done this for years. We had a turnover of power, a graceful turnover of power in England, and now it is the United Kingdom and in England descending into riots and protest on the streets. How do you observe that? What can be the government response to a persistent rioting as we see in Starmer's England?
I think it's a 2-step response. One is you first try to control the immediate situation, which is what they're trying to do. And then the second one is to look at the cause of this and the cause of the polarization and alienation of segments of the population. And it is about low, non-inclusive growth. The new Labour government has called growth a mission. They now have a growth mission. So it comes right at the top of the policy agenda. And I think that unless we start generating high, inclusive, durable, and sustainable growth, then the social and the political fabric will come under pressure.
Dr. El-Erian, thank you so much. With Queen's College, University of Cambridge, Mohamed El-Erian with an important and timely discussion, particularly there on Japan. To me, Paul, that's the heart of the debate. Is I get the idea of global slowdown and the central bank and the Fed and last week, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, it is the unwinding of a massive policy challenge. I look carefully.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into it now. We don't have time. But the integran, the length, the duration of their inflation spurring experiment is unprecedented.
Yeah.
It's like ever. They've never put so much into escaping the malaise the great Marty Feldstein spoke of. That was wonderful, magical to have Mohamed El-Erian talking on the great work of the late Martin Feldstein of Harvard University. Red and green on the screen. NASDAQ's fractionally negative. Dow up 45 points. The VIX 32.60. Real churning of the market after what we saw yesterday. Thanks for all your comments, particularly search and subscribe out at Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a mix of green and red on the screen. Markets trying to bounce back after that sell-off that erased about $6.5 trillion from the global equity markets over the past few weeks. Right now, we'll get to it. The NASDAQ down about 0.1%, 25 points. The Dow up 0.2%, 77 points. And the S&P 500 up 0.2%, or 11 points. The 2-year yield at 3.92%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year 3.81%. And that is up about 1 basis point. Heading over to machinery maker Caterpillar right now, up about 2.5%. 2024 profits higher than expected despite seeing slightly lower sales for the full year. Then you have Uber shares up about 4%, better than expected orders in the second quarter. And then Yum Brands, you know them, they own Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, posted weaker than expected sales, but shares up nearly 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Any day out of 200 business days in the year is a good day to talk to Barry Ritholtz, but I would suggest today is a sterling way to end this hour. Paul Sweeney, is Alex in today or is she on sabbatical?
Of course she's in. Yeah, absolutely.
Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, look for that coming up here. In particular focus, we're looking at Bitcoin, which is a gold equivalent. It's like 50-something, 55,000. Right now, Barry Ritholtz joins us. His master's in business is a clinic. I'm jealous. really long conversations with good and smart people. And you're working on a new book, right?
Yeah, how not to invest.
When? Like
March 2025.
Have you sold the movie rights?
No movie rights yet.
Okay.
Still up for grabs.
I'm going to circle back with Michael Lewis. He seems to know how to get finance books made into films. So maybe he has some advice for me.
It's a great thing. We've so been through this before. I actually went back and looked at a VIX of 80, and I think it was 2008. I can't remember now. But did you get panic calls at Ritholtz management yesterday? Or, what do you do when the troops call and say, go to cash?
So my favorite example of how to manage this is when you are waiting to take off on a flight. In the seat pocket in front of you is that card that explains what to do in an emergency. And the time to read it is while you're sitting on the ground waiting to take off. If you're at 30,000 feet and an engine flames out and the plane loses 5,000 feet of altitude in an instant, that's not when you reach for that seat back. If you're going to put capital at risk in the equity markets, when you pull that trigger, that's when you have the conversation with the client. Hey, stocks go up and down. That volatility is very normal, that in the typical year, we see 1 or 2 5% pullbacks, and in 2 out of 3 years, you're going to see a 10% pullback. And the more complacent we are and the lower the VIX is, think of it like the tectonic plates that are rubbing up against each other, and all that stress and all that friction is building up, and it looks calm from the surface, but when it crosses a certain point, that's where you get the dislocation. You get an earthquake and everybody panics, but the time to plan is beforehand. If you're reacting after the fact, well, you're just guaranteeing a bad emotional decision.
Did you sense panic yesterday, particularly yesterday morning?
When you see the VIX spike up to over 60, and I've been away from my desk for a few days, so I watched with a great deal of frustration, because normally that sort of spike gets my mouth watering to be a trader again, to be a buyer. But it was so fast and so furious, it didn't generate the sort of response that we see from mom and pop. The professionals, there was some degree of panic. You saw liquidations taking place. Just look at how BitDog has traded over the past couple of sessions. I'm not sure if Bitcoin is accurately described as digital gold. Well, it's a different speculative. It's a different sort of speculative commodity.
I haven't asked this yet. You go to Michael Lewis. I was in an exam with LSE, and literally, when I went into the exam and came out, there was a flash crash. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally. I'm not kidding. And my basic idea is with the Japanese overlay, which we just talked to Mohamed El-Erian about, with the unwind of Japan, are we in the middle of a flash crash and not a normal pullback?
Certainly, there's a good case to be made for that. That when you suddenly when most central banks are either cutting or thinking about cutting, to have Japan suddenly say, "Hey, after a few decades of very, very low inflation and quite a long period of negative interest rates, it's time for us to continue a hiking cycle." They're out of step with the rest of the central bank community. But that's because the Japanese experiment is so unique manufacturing prowess, unique demographic challenges, and a history recently, anyway, of deflation, not inflation. So Japan is it's long-winded way to say, yes, it seems like it's more specific in Japan of its own thing than something broader and more structural like we saw during the financial crisis or during the pandemic.
On Friday on social media, there was a lot of talk about the SOM rule. And did the data from Friday trigger the SOM rule about maybe this economy is in a recession? You had some comments. You had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so first of all, any economic rule that we look at, right, especially ones with 100% perfect track record, like the inverted yield curve or the SOM rule or whatever, you're dealing with a data set of a dozen examples, not millions, not thousands, 10, 11, 12. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. Secondly, The Sahm rule was designed by our friend Claudia Sahm in an earlier era to measure an uptick in unemployment as a sign of a weakening economy, increased layoffs, and just a general slowing of economic activity. When you take apart, and Claudia has posted on her own rule about this, when you take apart the reasons for unemployment going up, it's not going up due to more layoffs. It's going up due to, A, more people entering the labor force, which is a sign of strength, not weakness,
Right.
a bunch of additional immigrants coming to the United States and finding their way into the labor force. And if you read, so that's Jim Bianco talking about immigration, and then Ed Yardeni explains how the weather had an outside effect on temporary people entering the labor force or not working due to weather issues. And so this doesn't smell like your normal surge in layoffs and slowdown in the economy.
1 minute is all I got left. The Warren Buffet is cash, cash, cash. He's just going to ginormous cash. What's it signal to you? To me, the media's making way too much of it. The guy's 80 whatever years old. He's loading the boat on
86,
cash.
87? Right.
Whatever. What do you make of the fact that Mr. Buffet sold some more Apple?
I'm a big fan of Warren. At what point does Apple just become way too much of his portfolio? Position sizing
90.
is 3%,
Thank you,
4%,
90.
5%. At a certain point, you say, hey, I can't have my diversified portfolio be dominated by one or two companies. And he's made ridiculous amounts of money in Apple. He's allowed to occasionally ring the bell and say, let's take a little bit of profit off the table.
What do the Knicks look like coming into the fall season here?
So excited.
So excited?
You gotta be thrilled with what I have this T-shirt. Disappointing fan since 1974. And I'm gonna have to retire that shirt because they have put together a great coach, a great team. Some of the trades that are being talked about.
Constructive.
I mean, you have to be impressed with, especially given how terrible management has been for decades.
Barry, you're lifting the market. I got to do a data check here. Barry Ritholtz from Masters in Business. The book anticipated for March. Dow lifts 280 points. Nasdaq up 0.8. S&P up 0.8%. The Nasdaq up 0.6%. Come on, I need a 29 VIX. I'm not there. 30.17 on the VIX. 30.17. 29. I'm not going to give you an opinion, folks, but a flash crash versus like pullback in this, I think, is germane here to Japan. Thank you to our team for blowing up the show 3 times. Barry Ritholtz, his next book, it's entitled Money for Nothing. Good morning.